Okay, I call this meeting of the City of Urbana Council Committee of the Whole to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Mr.
Here.
Ammons. Mr. Brown.
Here.
Mr. Jacobson.
Here.
Mr. Madigan.
Here.
Ms. Marlin.
Here.
Mr. Roberts.
Here.
Mr. Smythe.
Here.
Mayor Pressing.
Okay, first up, we have approval of the minutes of our previous meeting, September 12th, 2016.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Aaron, seconded by Diane. Are there any corrections?
I assume
Diane?
this includes the correction in item 12 where we struck committee of the whole and added city council.
Yes, there's a corrected set here. Yeah, there were some corrected ones on our table.
Okay.
So assuming that we're approving the corrected ones, any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Are there any additions to the agenda? Okay. Public input, we have two items up front. Bishop King James and Reverend Dr. Evelyn Underwood don't wish to speak, but they ask that their position be entered in the record that they're continually concerned about the Dr. Ellis subdivision sewer problem. And then Durrell Cruz wishes to address us now on the IDOT Traffic Task Force.
Good evening, Durrell Cruz. I would like to address the issue of the IDOT traffic stop discussion, at least during the public comment session tonight. Several weeks ago, the mayor had an editorial in the News Gazette to the editor section of the paper, and it stated, I quote, "It is a great disservice to elevate one discredited measure and ignore all evidence to the contrary," in terms of referring to census data and the use of census data to determine racial disparities in Urbana. Our knowledge and understanding of traffic stops in Urbana today far exceeds what we knew 12 years ago. The question of using census data to measure racial bias in Urbana traffic stops is no longer relevant, useful, meaningful in helping us to assess this local problem. In fact, our current understanding of traffic stops is no longer dependent upon solely this census data. Through the efforts of many, we have expanded our local knowledge and understanding to the point that not only suggests, but also factually supports that racial disparities exist in local traffic stops. Instead of ignoring evidence, we have expanded the evidence. Consider, number one, for 12 years, an average of 30% of all traffic stops in Urbana have involved African American drivers. This figure is not related to census data. Two, 12 years of data shows statistically significant racial bias in traffic stop consent searches, dog sniffs, hit rates. None of this data is related to census figures. The STEP data shows that when traffic stops are conducted solely for safety reasons, racial disparities dramatically decrease. This data is not related to census figures. Number four, no-fault traffic accident data from 2009 to 2013 show that approximately 18% of all accidents in Urbana involve African American drivers. This data is not related to census figures. The city has had two statisticians study local traffic stop data, Tom Christoff in 2010 and Paul Tessa in 2014. Many of the conclusions arrived by these statisticians are not dependent upon or related to census data, and they find racial disparities. To suggest that the efforts of many the past 12 years has been elevated to one discredited measure, the traffic stop ratio, and ignore all evidence to the contrary is simply false, misleading, and diverting attention from the real issues that will help our community solve this injustice and move forward. Leonard Pitts, a black syndicated newspaper writer, on racial issues recently wrote, "You will never solve any problem you can't bring yourself to face." No more excuses, please. The City Council must finally bring itself to face the question of whether particular law enforcement methods contribute to improving the public safety, or rather to traffic stop racial disparities at the expense of our black community. Tonight, as you have this discussion, I would like to ask that you ensure that your statistician include data in regards to hit rates, and also in multiple stops that we talked about last time. I don't think there was any commitment made that those two areas should be included. I also just distributed to you feedback. One of the priorities I think Mr. Bautista was
You have 1 minute, Mr. Cruz.
addressing was the issue of how you can gather feedback from the community. I would suggest that the most direct and simple and effective way of doing it is simply to have officers pass out a survey card at the conclusion of any traffic stop that does not involve an arrest. That is done in communities around the country and would provide a very simple and quick and cost-effective way of gathering this data from our local community. In terms of the discussion you might have later with regards to policing tactics or strategies involving investigatory stops, I would hope that you might consider a moratorium or some type of adjustment to the current policy being used that would simply require that pretextual stops be done only when a criminal evidence is presented, and then the investigatory stop can continue. Thank you very much.
Questions for Darrell? Thank you very much. Next up, do we have any other presentations? Okay, seeing none, we have a staff report on Chapter 20 right-of-way revisions. Brad.
Hi, I'm Brad Bennett, Assistant City Engineer. I'm here to speak with you tonight about a little bit of follow-up on the proposed revisions to Chapter 20, which is the Public Right-of-Way Ordinance. So if you remember from a previous meeting, there were three primary objections raised by the fiber contractor. The first was regarding the spoil excavation material. We were originally looking at not allowing them to deposit the spoil excavation material in the right-of-way for any period of time. He had an objection to the size requirements for the utility work notification signs that were to be put in the right-of-way to let people know what utility was doing the work. And then finally, he was concerned about the one-dig policy requirements that would limit utilities from providing service to new customers. So just to review real quick, this is a photo of a spoil pile. In fact, it's from my front yard, so thanks, Ameren, for this. So this is what we're trying to avoid. When they do a utility excavation, believe it or not, all the soil they take out does not usually fit back in the same hole. So this is after probably about 4 to 6 weeks. It's had a couple rainstorms on it. So this is what we're trying to avoid in our right-of-way when we were looking at it, making modifications to it. We did dig through the ordinance, and we actually found another section of the ordinance that requires removal of excess excavation materials and restoration of the landscape within 10 days of the disturbance activities, so when they put the utility in. So we're willing, as staff, to consider as a compromise to the utilities, not requiring the spoil material to be removed at the time that the excavation is done, but giving them and enforcing the 10-day limit where they have to get the spoil materials out and the seed and mulch and fertilizer down to get the grass growing. So that would be one item we'd look at compromising with the utilities on. Regarding the signage language, and the reason that we are looking at doing this is there's so many utilities working in the right-of-way. A lot of times the residents don't know which particular contractor or utility is doing the work. Very often the residents have to contact us, the city, to find out who's doing that work. So after going through and reviewing the language, we did not find that there are any size requirements, so I'm not sure what the utility was objecting to. There is no maximum or minimum size requirements. It just has to be something that's viewable by the public. So you don't have to have a big sign. I think the realtor style signs or the yard sale signs would be adequate. It's just for information purposes. So for this, we don't think we really need to make any changes to the proposed revisions to the ordinance, because there are no minimum or maximum size requirements, or even how it's mounted, other than it can't be mounted on city infrastructure. And then finally, on the exemptions from on the one dig policy, we think there's enough exemptions to keep it from having an overly negative impact on utilities. I've got listed here what is actually in the ordinance as far as exemptions from it. So, for example, the first one, if they've taken commercially reasonable efforts to plan and anticipate the work, and I think that would get to what that particular utility was concerned about. If a big customer comes in and they need to add an area, I mean, that is obviously something that maybe they couldn't anticipate and would allow an exemption from the one dig policy requirement. We've got the point repairs under 50 feet. If it's an emergency repair, obviously, if the work needs to be done or it's going to cause an inconvenience to the public, and then finally, if it creates an economic hardship. So you can see there's all kinds of exemptions to the policy. We figure that, or are concerned that if we weaken or try to change the language, it'll become so weak it won't have the effect of trying to coordinate utility operations so that we minimize the impact on the public. Florida Avenue was a great example, or not a great example, because it was a terrible example of, we had 3 utility contractors tearing up the right-of-way within a given year, so we would seek to try to avoid that in the future if we can. So that's all I had. And like I mentioned on this one, we don't recommend any revisions because we feel the exemptions that were included in the ordinance are adequate enough for the utilities to operate under. And then finally, where we would move forward from here, the next steps would be, assuming you approve, we would go ahead and finalize the revisions to Chapter 20. We would notify utilities with franchise and license agreements of the proposed revisions, give them a copy of the language, give them an opportunity to comment on that. We would present any of their objections or concerns, and then finally, if you were approving, we would go ahead and adopt those revisions to the ordinance. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions.
Diane?
When does the 10-day clock start ticking? Is it after when construction in a particular block is first started, or after it's ended? I mean, I use the Florida Avenue as an example because those spoil piles were there for weeks and weeks and weeks. So how do you constitute a 10-day?
I would say generally the 10-day is supposed to start when their construction activities cease. So when they might come in and do the initial bore and then come back and pull the conduit. But when we're done installing their work, that's when the clock would tick. We wouldn't have the expectation that they would do some restoration and then have to come back and tear it up again. So it would be when the work was complete.
In a particular segment in a block,
correct.
For example.
And the other factor we'll end up fighting is obviously landscape restoration is dependent upon time of year. So it might be very difficult to actually get grass to grow in the middle of summer, but there's no reason they can't proceed with the finish grading and seeding. So when we do get adequate temperatures and moisture, we get that landscape restoration going.
Okay.
Other questions? Bill?
I don't recall on the landscape restoration, if people have made improvements to the right-of-way, like with some decorative stones or some plantings other than grass, is there any responsibility for the utility to help repair that or reimburse the homeowner to do it themselves?
There is not, but generally we try to encourage the utilities to restore back to what the original condition was and work with the homeowners. Where it becomes particularly problematic is if going through landscape beds that might be in the parkway. And what we've been trying to work with the utilities is to give the resident enough notification to possibly pull as much of their landscaping out, or even have the utility set it off to the side and have the resident come back and install it after the utility work is done. So even though it's not a requirement, we obviously want to try to minimize the impact on the property owners.
Are there any opportunities to formalize that in this policy?
I mean, I would have to do some research into that. Anyone that installs landscaping or improvements in the right-of-way is supposed to have a license agreement, and generally as part of the license agreement it says that if the utility comes through and does any work, they're not obligated to pay the cost. So
I think even notification would help a lot, I think.
yeah, I think it would too.
Thanks.
Other questions? Okay, I'll just follow up. I really like the idea of at least putting in some minimum notification so that people can get their stuff out of the way. The other question I have is, okay, I think most people will use a small sign. I assume our sign ordinance would probably, and maybe Libby can help on this, I assume our own sign ordinance would keep them from putting in a billboard in somebody's yard and using it for advertising, right? Yeah, okay, so we're covered there. So what's your schedule going forward here on this slide? How quickly do you expect to come back to council?
I'm guessing it'll probably be November. We'll want to get the proposed revisions out to all the utilities and give them 2 to 3 weeks to read through them and respond. And then at that point, we'll compile, any comments or suggestions we get, and then present those to council.
So 4 weeks from now would be our next, would be a committee meeting, and it'd be appropriate there if you can make it.
Yeah, I think
That way we
late
can
October,
approve.
early November.
Late October council committee meeting, and then we can approve it the first week of November if there are no other. If that's reasonable,
I think so.
Dennis.
And just to address a little bit the, I guess, customer satisfaction of the reclaimed landscaping in the parkway. In front of my home, about 3 feet of good earth was taken up and filled with 2.5 feet of crushed rock, and then 6 inches of earth was put on there, and then somebody threw some seeds down, and not much happened after that. I don't own the parkway, but who would review whether the re-landscaping was sufficient?
I'm generally the right-of-way technician is the one that checks that. Generally, though, I mean, we're just checking to see how well the turf establishes itself. A lot of times, we're just looking at finished grade and seed and how it comes up. I mean, we could look at having some requirements as far as topsoil.
You might want to, because a lot of natural good earth was removed, and very, very little of it was returned to that area. So it just seems like there could be some limitations of, or some expectations that the city would have to restore its own property.
Mm-hmm.
Eric.
One could imagine a different system in which, instead of the contractor, the utility being responsible for the restoration, the utility would be assessed a restoration fee which would cover the cost, and the city would restore. Is that, in your opinion, something that should be considered, or is that really a bad idea for some reason?
Well, actually, that is kind of the backup system. If the utility does not perform the landscape restoration, we as the city, per the ordinance, can go in and have a landscape contractor complete it for us, and then we bill them for it. My only concern would be our experience with utilities paying fines and things that we've assessed them for damaging trees or other portions of right-of-way. It's been sometimes very difficult to get them to pay. So, I mean, that'd be the one concern, is essentially we'd have to be fronting the money for it and trying to collect from them.
I guess I'm not thinking of this as a fine for not doing it right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just thinking of simply shifting the responsibility to the city, but assessing the cost
Mm-hmm.
to the utility.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite possible we could do that. I mean, we do landscape restoration, obviously, on our own, sewer repairs and, on our road projects. I mean, it would be additional work for city staff, to monitor those locations and make sure the contractor got in and did it, but it would be feasible to do that.
Okay, so is everybody okay with the schedule and the suggested changes, and we'll see what comes back? Okay, thanks, Brad.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is Windsor Road update.
Good evening. I'm Craig Schunkweiler, Assistant City Engineer, and of course Bill Gray, Public Works Director, City Engineer, is here with me. We thought it was time to come forth with a pavement issue status. I know that several council members have been inquiring about the Windsor Road pavement and where are we sitting with that project. I will tell you that city staff has continued to monitor the pavement and that the cracking has not stopped as of the end of August here. About 61% of the westbound, which would be the north two lanes, those slabs are cracked. About 33% of the eastbound, which is the south two lanes, are continuing to crack. Through time here, we have about a year ago or so, we started noticing a few cracks here and there. Kind of continued on through August and September while the contractor was wrapping up their pours. We basically began to get really concerned about a year ago in September. We hit a time when we got down to a low of about 44 degrees overnight. We ended up getting quite a few cracks that showed up. And so we basically called timeout with the contractor. None of us were quite sure what was going on at the time, so we agreed to do some cursory analysis with a local pavement company. And they determined and suggested that all of the eastbound lane, which was closed to traffic, be analyzed. At that point, in about November of last year, we made a request for Stark to repair the pavement that was cracked. And in essence, we came to agreement that with Stark that there would be a disagreement between the two parties. And at that point, we had many meetings over the course of the end of fall through the winter period into the spring of this year on where we met with pavement consultants, Illinois Department of Transportation representatives, Stark, the contractor who constructed the pavement, their pavement consultants, attorneys representing the city and Stark in an effort to resolve the cause of the pavement cracks and determine responsibility for fixing the pavement. About a month ago or so in August, we asked for additional testing to be performed and sampling, and the testing was performed in the westbound lanes and some of the closed eastbound lanes to obtain a complete set of pavement data and limit future road closures. And the results from that pavement testing were not available at the time of this memo or nor today. We do not have the results from that pavement testing. Keep in mind there is a tremendous amount of data to be analyzed. Each joint in the westbound lane was analyzed. That's over 404 joints. So that's a lot of data to process. Possible crack causations. We thought it was important to put this section in the memo. There's been a lot of discussion about possible causes of the cracks. To date, there has not been an agreement on a particular cause. Considerations have been made by pavement consultants for the base material, the slab base friction, which in essence is how they one moves relative to the other, the spacing of the joints or the slabs. Basically the steel that's transversely placed or longitudinally placed along the curb or the center of each lane, with reference to the size, the spacing, and then how that steel interacts with the concrete, whether or not the slabs had some built-in curling and warping of them, and then the particular concrete materials have been analyzed and looked at in depth, as well as the paving operations at the time of placement of the concrete. A little over 2 weeks ago, September 12th, through our attorney, the City of Urbana made a request to Stark to open the road fully to traffic. In that request, there was requests made to fix fractured or faulted panels. We do have some that occurred primarily in the open sections of pavement. A fractured or faulted panel would mean, fractured would mean that the panel actually shifted one up and the other one down. Fractured would mean that there's more than one panel, or the panel broke into several different pieces. So we think that those are important to replace before opening the road fully to traffic. And then, of course, there would be some adjustments to the traffic signals and some pavement striping taking place to get the road fully open. As of today, we have not heard a response from Stark. We have not received a response from Stark to that request. We should note that opening the road, we feel, does not mean the city has finally accepted the road. Where we see this heading is we're still hopeful that Stark will cooperate with the city to open the road before winter sets in. We will continue to work with Stark to try to resolve this issue, and in the absence of a mutual resolution of the dispute, it is possible that litigation could occur. Are there any questions?
Dennis, then Diane.
The statement that the city, if the city opened up the road, it would not. The city feels it would not indicate that it accepts the road, is responsible for it. Is that just our opinion, or is that based on some kind of verifiable regulation?
There is language in the contract specifications, which is a booklet that's published by the Department of Transportation, that allows for in this case, the city engineer, which would be Bill Gray, to open the road without final accepting it if he felt that it was in the best interest of the public to do so.
So we could use it, but not actually accept it.
That is our opinion.
Diane.
Well, just to go on record, there's nothing that the public in my part of town anyway wants more than to have the road fully open. It's just been a disaster for the businesses in South Urbana, as you know, and a real safety hazard. So I'll go pick up those barricades myself when the time comes. So just let me know. But my question is it actually unsafe to open that road without replacing those fractured or faulted slabs?
The road could be open, and actually there's traffic driving on those fractured slabs now. It just becomes an issue as those slabs begin to take repeated loading, and they will shift and move, which then can become a problem, say in time, where they either break further or they punch down and create a pothole. So at that point, then it becomes a safety issue. So what we're trying to do is try to get it. We realize the road is cracked. We're just trying to take the worst of the cracks, get those fixed, open the road, then continue the other process of however we're going to resolve the issue. We feel that it's time to open the road, so why not open it?
Well, I guess my question is if the fractured faulted slabs are a hang-up in the process toward getting the road open, what's the benefit and cost of just saying, okay, we'll we'll keep the fractured slabs there. We'll deal with the potholes, which we have dealt with before on Windsor Road, and just get that thing open.
Right. And I would, we respect that. I think everybody wants, we wouldn't let that be an obstacle to getting this thing open.
Okay. And we can deal with the striping issue as well.
We could do that, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Eric?
As a safety issue with respect to the condition of the road, do you think that when the road is open, but it's still not in the condition that we had wanted or hoped it to be, should the speed limit be lowered, or do you think that's not necessary?
I really don't think it's necessary. Right now, it's been lowered through the, while construction, the barrels are in place, but we would return it to its original 40-mile-an-hour speed. The issue isn't so much with the cracks about the immediate use, it's the long-term use. We're talking 7, 10, 15 years down the road, and what that means to the city as far as maintenance.
Other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. I know this has taken a huge amount of time from both of you and staff cutting into other projects, so you have our gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other staff reports? Chief?
Good evening. Actually, there's going to be two. Both will be incredibly short. I have the pleasure of introducing our newest employee, Melissa Haynes. Melissa, grab a seat up here and say hello to everybody.
Hello.
Let me share just a little bit about her. She did both her undergrad and graduate work at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. Her master's degree was in criminology. She's been working with the criminal justice field since 2011, with much of her work focusing on research through the Crime and Justice Institute, as well as a research assistant with SIU. Melissa just completed a week-long police crime analysis training conference in Louisville, Kentucky, and she's quickly becoming acclimated to all of our computer systems. Has not fully mastered them yet, but is incredibly close. She's done incredibly well. Her background and past work experience are very impressive. Much of her research on policing is publicized in peer-reviewed journals, and she's written several technical reports. I think it'll suffice to say that we are going to keep her incredibly busy, but most importantly, I wanted you all to put a face with the name and welcome her to the city of Urbana.
Welcome.
With that being said, Sylvia has a very short report, and then we'll move forward. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Chief
Yes,
Morgan.
it should be very short. Deputy Chief Sylvia Morgan, for anyone that doesn't know. In light of all the violence that we've been seeing in the world, and more recently and specifically at home over the weekend, I thought it was important to share just a little bit of good news by way of an email that the police department received recently. It was written by a Urbana resident that lives on Nevada Street. Her name is Ruth Stoltzfus. I asked her permission to use her name, and she said that was fine. She titled the email, Exemplary Service Received from Police Officers. And she writes, I write to express my gratitude to 3 Urbana police officers. On Thursday, August 25th, our house was broken into around 3:30 a.m. There were 2 people in the house at the time, both sleeping. By the time we realized what was happening and went to the living room, the intruders had fled. Luckily, there were no injuries. Your officers arrived within 30 seconds of my phone call. They were polite, efficient, caring, and exhibited very professional behavior. I only know the name of the female officer, Officer Vogt, but there were 2 male officers with her. And for the record, those are Officer Wright and Officer Burnett. Please extend my profound thanks to them for their commendable service. And that's all I have.
That note also went out to the West Urbana neighborhood list, or something to that effect. So, okay, any other staff reports? Libby Tyler. Community Development.
Tomorrow is the last Tuesday of the month, so that's food truck rally for lunch, again at the Civic Center, 11 to 2. And then coming up the end of this week is the Regional Neighborhood Network Conference. We've been working hard on that for several months, and we'll be hosting surrounding communities in the larger region. I know several of you have already registered, and I'm looking forward to seeing you there. Among the sessions that Urbana will be involved in will be a discussion of our work that we've been doing with Habitat for Humanity in one panel session, and another session on developing affordable housing in a park-like setting. We'll be doing that with the Housing Authority in the Urbana Park District. We also have several guides, guided tours that will be happening, including one featuring just gardens within Urbana. I know there's another one on public art. So still time to register. You can register on site. Starts Thursday evening, sessions all day Friday, and then into Saturday. It will be at the Hilton Garden Inn, and the website is 2016rnnc.com. And we've got lots of great information on our website as well. That's my report.
Okay, any questions? Okay, thank you. And it looks like we have one more here. Brandon, boys? Oh, no. Okay. Okay. Anything else?
I'm just staying here for the next session.
Oh, okay.
I'm excited.
Okay. I forgot to mention that item number 10, the ordinance vacating Bar Avenue on North Cunningham, that's been pulled from our agenda. Sorry. Okay, next up is ordinance number 2016-993, an ordinance adopting an amended and restarted agreement for loan guarantee support by and between the City of Urbana, a municipal corporation, and Urbana Development Group, a not-for-profit community development corporation. Libby.
Okay, and these are some amendments to an existing agreement that we've had with the Urbana Development Group since 2008. And we have tonight here one of the officers, Carolyn Baxley, who can answer any questions you might have. The group is just working on their third purchase in the West Urbana neighborhood, and part of their goal and their mission is to help facilitate the conversion of potential rental properties to well-maintained owner-occupied properties in the area. Cities participated since 2008 by providing a loan guarantee, whereby we've guaranteed up to 25% of the appraised value of a property to a total value of no more than $85,000 per property. And that guarantee is allows the group to finance 100% of the value of a property, and is secured by a mortgage on the property as well by the city. Been good progress by the group. Most recently, the purchase is at 611 West Oregon, and they have plans to fix up this beautiful property and to market it for sale. The amendments that are proposed to the agreement would be to remove the requirement that we actually budget the loan guarantees in the annual budget. This is not something that we've done, nor is it recommended by our finance director, because this is not a program that actually results in an expenditure or the need to budget an expenditure. And rather, finance director has recommended we simply set a limit on the loan guarantee in the agreement. And so we've set a limit of working on providing loan guarantee for no more than 3 properties at any time. Also, some other requested changes to the agreement in the restatement would be to provide for regular reports rather than annual reports to the City Council, as the pace of the acquisitions is not always occurring on an annual basis. And finally, we were recommending a change to the conflict of interest section, where we would limit that to the members of the board and their family members, thinking that the use of the term associate could be conferred very broadly. All the board members are very well known in the community, and did not feel that that was a precise enough term. Fiscal impact would, again, would be only in the most extreme of circumstances and is not expected to result in a fiscal impact upon the city. Any questions?
Bill.
Did you say this was the third property? The 611 was the third? The Halberstadt house was one, right? Was that one of them? What were the other two?
No, that wasn't involved.
Oh.
And I had a list today. The first one was 814 West Main. And we did
Okay.
go through the refinancing on that. That was a startup property. Then it was a quick turnover at, was it 508 West Elm or Main? 508 was first. Okay. Carolyn knows the sequence. I did the best. I looked through the files. I had some questions, but Carolyn Baxley's been with Urbana Development Group from the beginning, and she's one of the board members.
Yeah, Carolyn, you filled out a sheet, so I assume you wanted to say something, or are you just here to answer questions?
I mean,
Oh, okay.
it's pretty simple, the modifications, unless the council has some questions. I might just say that, you know, we got off to a slow start due to some unfortunate circumstances. 2 of our board members died, and another had a serious illness that took her out of commission for a while. But now we're hoping to ramp up. I did secure our 501c3 designation from the IRS, which makes a huge difference in terms of being able to look for grants and possibly accept donations if anyone from West Urbana, you know, wants to make one. In fact, we just got one yesterday for $5,000. So, you know, I think they will be coming in, and we hope to move at a little bit faster clip here. We're very excited about 611 West Oregon, and we're in the process now. We have a contract for sale, and we're in the process of trying to work with one of the banks that said they were interested in working with us when we started. We've floated it out, and we're waiting for, you know, a bank to step forward that wants to do it. The first 2 projects were done through Soy Capital and through First Federal, so this one will probably be through another bank.
Bill?
Yeah, so I understand that having the city involved with this guarantee helps so that you can get 100% loan for the property.
Right.
I don't-
It keeps us basically from having to put up a down payment, so we can go in and start work on the house without having a cash drain.
Yeah,
But
so-
no money changes hands, which is why the modification, you know, that's before you tonight.
Yeah,
But-
so my question is, where do you get the money for the rehab? I've been involved in some rehabs, and it's often hard to come out ahead, and it takes a lot of capital to do the rehab. So is that from donations? and
No, that's from the
grants?
bank as well. They will fund the purchase and the renovations. We give them a total package. For example, on West Oregon, we're talking really a fairly modest rehab of West Oregon. It's in very good condition, and the objective is to hopefully continue to see it as single family. It has some upgrades that need to be made, but nothing really major. So that would be funded by the bank as well, just as if my husband and I are also doing, you know, contracting. That's kind of what we do. So it's the same kind of situation. The bank lends you the purchase price, they lend you the money to rehab it, and then when the rehab is done, it's rolled into a conventional mortgage. Except in this case, when the rehab is done, it'll go on the market and be sold. So.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Dennis?
So it comes in, or you purchase it as a rental, or an apartment, or a duplex, and it now becomes a, no, you don't.
Well, in this case, it was a single-family home, but we also perceived that because of the proximity to the university that it was in danger of becoming a rental. In fact, a group from Chicago looked at it on the same day we did, and if they had not accepted our offer, they would have come in and purchased it. So, you know, we just hated to see such a wonderful house go, you know, to another student rental. Granted, it is in a low-density zoning district, so they wouldn't have been able to fill it with, you know, students, but this is a very significant house. In fact, we suspect that it was actually designed by Joseph Royer, but we can't find any proof of that yet, but we're still working on that. So, you know, we were just concerned about the house, and when we saw it was on the market, several of us were aware of it already, and so we thought this would make a nice project for us to do. It wouldn't require a great deal of capital, and we can also turn it fairly quickly. So that's another objective, and so we hope to be able to secure the financing and acquire it.
Do you think that your group will ever consider doing the same for commercial buildings in the city?
It's not our objective. I mean, it's not in our mission statement. What we hope to do is try to reclaim some of the houses. One of the things that's happening is the high-rise apartment development all over the campus town is actually drawing some students away from renting in West Urbana. After the beginning of the semester, if you walk around in the neighborhoods, you probably notice there's a lot more rental signs in the yards than there are generally. And we think it's because the students are going to the more, the newer apartment buildings with more amenities and kind of, if you will, abandoning the lower end rental market in West Urbana. So we see that as an opportunity, and that's why we want to, try to pick up the pace a bit. We need some new board members, and we think there will be an opportunity to acquire some of those houses from the rental landlords who are having difficulty renting them.
Do you find that there's customers waiting?
I'm sorry?
Do you find that there are customers waiting for these kinds of remodeled houses?
I don't think there's any question there will be for this particular one because of the house and its proximity to the university. Anything in the West Urbana area, of course, is very desirable for university professors and staff who want to live close to the campus. So, as you know, or those of you who live in West Urbana certainly know, many of these properties sell before they ever hit the market. And you may not even know that they've sold because they sell neighbor to neighbor, or someone on the next street hears that the property's coming up for sale and they know someone who's coming in and the connection is made. So that happens a great deal in West Urbana, and that's why we think there is some hope of returning a lot of those rental properties to single-family use. But sometimes they're in really rough shape, and people are not willing to take that risk to do that. But this one, fortunately, is not. But we will be also not shying away from properties that need a lot of rehab. So we'll just evaluate it property by property with the involvement of community development.
Eric?
Yeah, I'll just, Carolyn's my neighbor on West Main Street, and in that area we had a tremendous amount of reversion from rental to owner occupation, including our family, who bought a home that had been rented out to students. So I think it's very, we've seen this dynamic, and I think it's very plausible and hopefully quite likely that this will happen farther south.
Yeah, I think so.
Other questions? Diane?
I think the changes are fine as far as the agreement, but my question was more general to Libby. Is this sort of loan guarantee support available in other parts of the community if someone were to form a community development corporation?
It could be. It was really the one way we could find to support the mission of this group, since they were focused primarily in areas where we don't have target funds, CDBG or home, and the incomes would be probably too high in those areas to apply those funds. So it was a way to provide some city support, and there may be other neighborhoods where that would be the same as well.
Okay, thank you.
Aaron?
So if we take up a loan and the property is destroyed or something like that, how do we monitor to make sure that the property is being well kept, that it's not going to become a liability for the city?
think there's been so few properties, and we're in close contact, and the city is actually on the board, so we can continue to monitor and discuss the process. But these have all been properties that have improved. So we have not, had a situation where there's been any failure of the maintenance.
I'd forgotten that detail, that the city has a spot on the board, right? One seat? Okay, yeah. Out of how many board members? How many board members do you typically have? How many board members do you typically have? Sorry, allergies.
It varies, 7 to, I don't have my bylaws right in front of me. I think we can go as high as 11.
Okay, but the city is at the table.
And also, Mr. Ammons, in terms of actually a loss of the property or anything like that, we have to carry insurance from the minute we buy it for the full amount. So the city is not in any risk in that regard while we're rehabbing it or until it's sold.
But, so I appreciate that. I just want to make sure that I'm crystal clear that if something, let's say for instance, some wonderful tenants go in there, they said they have the best intentions, and it turns into a meth lab, or it turns into something else where the property is destroyed. I don't know. I'm just wondering who's, we're responsible for paying that mortgage, right? And so how do we make sure that it's being monitored? I don't know who monitors it.
Okay.
Well, we don't rent the property. We have one that's rented to grad students, and as soon as they graduate, we'll be selling it for single family. The objective of the group is to resell the properties for single family use. And, if we rented it, like the grad students, were well vetted before they entered the property on Main Street. So, again, I don't know, the legal department could answer this better than I can, but I don't believe the city would have any liability in that case.
I think in the worst case, things went really bad and we called the mortgage, we'd own the property and we could sell it and recoup any loss. So we have a second mortgage on these. But again, don't anticipate that. And we do have controls, not just being on the board, but also just our controls that we have to maintain the condition of properties in the city as a whole.
Okay, thank you.
Diane.
Well, I'll move ordinance number 2016-09-093 to council with a recommendation for approval.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved by Diane Marlin, second by Eric Jacobson to send to council. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, this goes to council with a recommendation for approval.
Thank you all.
Okay, next up is ordinance number 2016-994, an ordinance approving a supplement to the redevelopment agreement by and between the City of Urbana, Champaign County, Illinois, and 129 North Race LLC in connection with the redevelopment project area number 2. Brendan Boyce.
Good evening. One moment. The ordinance being considered by council would approve a supplement to the existing redevelopment agreement with 129 North Race Street LLC. That agreement was first approved by the City Council on February 16th of 2015, and it was amended, a simple pen and ink amendment, to extend the completion date of the project by 1 year. The renovation of the structure continues. It is the first, in preparation for their first major retail tenant, which is Cherry Tree Cafe. The project, when full, is expected to be occupied by the Urbana Museum of Photography, Autumnberry inspired, and a creative co-working studio and office space that is intended to be used by both musicians and artists. During the renovation work, it was determined that the building's existing electrical system was deficient, and in order to accommodate all of the planned uses, a full-service upgrade, including the electrical panel for three-phase power, as well as replacement of the HVAC, and ultimately also the hot water heaters, would need to be replaced. These costs were unanticipated by the developer, and these new costs have placed the completion of the project and the tenancy of Cherry Tree Cafe in jeopardy. The proposed agreement would seek to supplement the existing agreement specifically for the cost of these unanticipated expenditures for mechanical, electrical, and plumbing that would achieve code compliance and allow for the multiple tenancy occupancies that have been envisioned. The amount of those expenditures, based on quotes reviewed by staff, is estimated at $55,000, which is inclusive of a 10% contingency. The draft agreement addendum provides specifically for reimbursement of actual receipts for specifically mechanical, electrical, and plumbing expenses at a rate of 80%, making the maximum allowable reimbursement $44,000. This addendum would increase the maximum reimbursement available for the project as a whole from $126,500 under the existing agreement. It's $126,500 under the amended agreement as proposed. That would be up from the $82,500 in the current agreement that's in effect. In order to achieve that maximum reimbursement under the proposed revised amended agreement, the developer would have to submit expenses in the amount of $355,000. And then the completion date does remain the same in this addendum. It does not change that completion date of June 30th, 2017. And I think the developer is here as well as outside of my line of sight. Matt Cho is here as well, one of the partners of 129 North Race LLC. Be happy to answer any questions.
Dennis.
Yeah. What was it about the electrical system that obviously when the property was first purchased, the buyers reviewed the building and they thought that the electrical system was adequate, and now we found out that there needs to be some changes. Is that what happened here?
That is my understanding, yes.
So it was an unexpected upgrade necessary. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it seems kind of reasonable to support this venture. I wonder if City Council could get a tour of the building at a state when we can see the improvements being addressed by city's assistance.
That's certainly possible with the permission of the property owners.
Yeah, it might be nice. It would be great to see the potential being realized so that we kind of had a sense of where the development was going and how long it was going to take.
I think Matt can probably answer that.
I guess you know how to contact me anytime that's available. I can give you a tour, or I guess at most 2 at a time, so feel free to contact.
Aaron, you had a question?
Yeah. So if I understand this correctly, the 129 is being moved out of TIF 2 into the new central TIF.
That's correct.
But it is sort of being selectively chosen to be moved into the new central TIF?
It's not selective. The properties that were to be relocated from TIF 2 have been static for about the last 6 months. So all those properties that had active agreements in TIF 2 are effectively being transferred to the central TIF. It's a different case for TIF 1 properties and development agreements, though, because that TIF is expiring.
It just seems to be always something new in the ever-moving and evolving TIF industry. So now we can move particular properties.
It's extremely rare to amend the boundary of a TIF. I wouldn't be surprised if this is... The city of Urbana, since it's had TIFs in the early 80s, has not amended the boundary of a TIF. So these are kind of unusual circumstances, and we're doing our best to work through them.
That's all for now.
Anyone else? Dan.
Just so I understand the terms of the agreement, the deadline for all the renovations has been extended to a year, 2017, June 30th, so everything has to be done.
Yes.
And if that's not the case, then they'll either be back asking for an extension, or what happens to the loan from the city?
Thanks for bringing that up. I didn't mention that in the original agreement, all of the reimbursements are made as a forgivable loan, and there's a promissory note that's recorded, and this addendum creates a second promissory note for the same purpose. I mean, of course, we would always seek to work with a developer to try to see what can be done to keep the project moving forward. In the worst case scenario, the city would record a lien on the property, I assume, and try to recoup its loss that way.
So I have a few more questions about the revenue stream on this property. The memo states that a retail establishment is supposed to generate $137,000 in sales tax over the period, presumably 2017 to 2022. Is that the cafe or some other retailer?
It is mostly the cafe or the wine bar.
So there's a cafe and a wine bar.
Yeah, they're deciding whether or not to pursue the liquor license or they just operate as a cafe.
And who's operating the cafe?
It's still Cherry Tree, but they are, because of the delays that have happened in this project, they are considering alternate locations. However, we are still the first and far ahead of everyone else, so time is of the essence to finish our completed ground floor renovation so that they can occupy the space.
Have they operated a restaurant before?
No. Mm-hmm.
This is their very first?
Right.
Have they operated a wine bar before?
No.
Okay. And is there a screen printer as a tenant, or is that a...
Currently, there's a creative use on the second floor that has a co-working feel to it. They lease to musicians and screen printing and basically graphic artists. It's unaffiliated with CoLab. It's basically another version of co-working or shared space.
So it's a studio, production studio?
Pretty much, yeah. That's
okay.
Centered around music and creative services.
And there's a commercial tenant referenced in the memo but not described. What's that?
They choose to remain, they don't want to publicize their move yet, but it is a service industry that fits within the mix of the ground floor use as proposed.
So you have a leased...
We are working through, they were supposed to lease in October, but with, again, the MEP concerns of the building, we have held off till January 1st now.
So there's no lease, okay. This band that was mentioned, I looked it up because I don't know many bands at all, and according to Smile Politely, they're in hiatus because they lost a lead guitarist. Withershins, are they still in existence?
I am also pretty low on the IQ about music, but it is a band member from the Weathershins, and he is operating the space, and he has done so in a way where we've subsidized the first year, but he has now signed a year lease to continue his operation.
So he's actually renting?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. He's had about 6 months of incubation in the space, and now he's committed long-term to operate this space.
So most of the revenue is going to come from rental income.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. None of this is going to be anything that I'm
okay.
I guess, directing or involved with.
And as far as the city's return, we're going to be looking at the sales tax revenue.
Right. So the ground floor is probably the most crucial thing that we've been focusing on. As long as we can activate that in a retail use or even a cafe restaurant use, that way we know that we can probably get a higher end office tenant as well as a basement tenant.
So the only thing generating sales tax on the first floor so far is this possible cafe or wine bar.
Right.
Okay.
And the commercial tenant that chooses to remain.
And they'll be selling something too?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Matt, real quickly, what's your anticipated timetable if approved?
We are, I would say, and again, if we do a walkthrough through the space, you'll see that a majority of the framework has been done. As long as we can finish our MEP and get that inspected, drywall goes up, and after that, it's pretty much, turnkey. So I would say we're about 60% there. MEP gets us to 80%, and the last 20% can be wrapped up relatively quickly because it's just finishes. I would say by the end of the year, if we're still in this situation, then we probably would, as owners, try to seek alternate means of leasing the space or reverting it back to its original use, which is, pretty much kind of what has happened for the last, 18 months of just lease month-by-month rentals of very low-end rent. It is not commercially occupiable because of what was discovered with the electrical phase currently supplied to the building.
Mike, then Bill.
So, Matt, first of all, I just want to say, I really appreciate what you do in trying to revitalize a lot of these downtown buildings. I'm having some difficulty with this one, however. Can you remind me what was the building vacant prior to your purchase, or what was the prior use?
The prior use was a cosmetology salon, and I believe they moved north to 5 Points, or that area on
Okay,
University.
so it basically had one tenant.
It was one tenant that occupied the whole building. I believe they vacated and had been on the market for about a year or so before we became interested in it. We acquired it and have now floated the building for about 2 years now. And we've tried, I guess part of that was working through the redevelopment agreement. And then it's been tough with buildings like this to find a tenant that will take 5,000 square feet, also that's been subdivided. So the multi-use tenant that we've proposed in the redevelopment agreement was the only way that we could probably activate the ground floor realistically, similar to what we did with the cafeteria and company 208 West Main, of getting co-oping restaurants and coffee shops who are also had never run a business before, to cooperate and basically share the space. In the same way that we're trying to do this with Main Street or Ray Street, which is further off the main draw, which makes it, slightly a little bit more difficult,
yeah.
right?
Oh, well, I guess my difficulty is not necessarily that, but it's so we're going from a single tenant to a multi-tenant type of situation, and my difficulty with this is how could it not have been anticipated that there would have had to been major mechanical changes from a single tenant to a multi-tenant scheme in the building? Were you going to pay the utilities up front? Or no, I'm sorry, were you going to include the utilities in the rent, is what I'm trying to say.
No, it's pretty much what any commercial landlord does. County Plaza, Fox Development, is that they charge $1 per square foot for utilities. What was told to me is because of a multi-tenant use is that I would have to sub-meter per each tenant. And so an office tenant that is renting approximately 200 square feet would have to have their own utility bill per Ameren's guidelines. And this is the first indication of problems that we had with the ground floor and doing a multi-tenant type building. So in that way, because that we were technically selling back utilities because of our multi-tenant use, problems arose from that, which meant that basically the whole electrical system had to be revised per that multi-tenant use that we wanted to have. Previously, that wasn't a problem because the cosmetology school paid for the whole building, and there was no subdivision of tenants. But now as we're going into more like a ground floor use, a second floor use, that separation of utilities is required by Ameren. And so that's something that, if we're not allowed to upgrade the electrical service to the building per that multi-tenant use, then we would still be stuck trying to find a one tenant for approximately 8,000 square feet.
No, I get it, but I guess what I'm trying to get at here is why didn't that all come up when you were figuring this all out before you came to the city, or while you were working with the city under the original agreement?
I was made aware of that while working with the city from the electrical inspector. He told me that was what I had to do.
After we had voted on an agreement?
Correct.
Well, that's my point. I mean, when you get into a venture, I mean, surely there are unforeseen circumstances in projects, but I'm not aware of one of this magnitude coming after the fact almost.
Neither am I. I mean, I've leased from County Plaza, and we have never gotten a utility bill. So the fact that they have multi-tenant use, but we're charged $1 per square foot per utilities, that's a multi-tenant way of dealing with utilities. And for us to now be told that we need to basically sub-meter our building because of that is unanticipated. If that is the case, then County Plaza and any commercial development in town should sub-meter to their utilities, to their tenants, utilities to their tenants.
Brandon had something to add here.
I just wanted to note that the School of Cosmetology, which occupied the space previously, had been located in that property for quite some time. And my understanding is that when the property was reviewed, it was found to be deficient for its prior use as well, and was actually dangerous, probably a danger to the prior tenant.
Which just begs the question, why didn't this come up earlier? I don't I don't get any of this. Sure, there are commercial tenants who can bill their tenants on a per square foot basis, but when you're talking about several distinct different businesses occupying the same space, it's pretty standard that they're all metered. It's pretty standard. So I'm not saying that this wouldn't have been approved if all this came up and this extra expense was included in the original deal, but I'm just having a little bit of heartburn with this after the fact major expenditure that in my opinion should have been, you should call Ameren and have them come in and say, what are we going to have to do to this building during the original formulation of the agreement. That's the part I'm having real difficulty with. I don't think I would ever go into a commercial renovation without knowing what's my electrical requirement, what's my plumbing requirement, what's that going to do to my HVAC. I don't get that.
I mean, technically, cafeteria and company, I should sub-meter for Pizza M and Flying Machine, but that's theoretically impossible unless I put a meter on every electrical plug. So technically, what is Ameren asking me to do with Ray Street is very inconsistent with what they're asking any property owner that rents or charges $1 per square foot in town. And if that's what we need to be in compliance with, then that's apparently what we need to do. I would not sub-meter my building at all. It's nonsensical to me.
Bill, then Eric.
Yeah, this is for Brandon, I think. The memo says that it's expected to produce approximately $20,000 in incremental tax revenue. That's annual increment. It's to be $20,000 in revenue. So what would be the expected increase in market value be? About $500,000?
No, I think it is 20,000 for through 2022. This is expected to have a minimal impact on the property value, as normally happens when we have downtown renovations. They tend to not have a significant impact on the EAV, which is why we're often looking to the use and the qualitative aspects of activating the buildings when we bring these agreements forward to council.
Okay.
I would have to go back and look at the spreadsheet to see what our assumption was, but I imagine
so it's not
quite
the annual
low.
increment; it's the total over the 6-year time.
Yeah, the property tax alone generally will not recoup the level, or the investment we make in a project
I'm just
like this.
trying to figure out how much the actual market value of the building would go up. It looks like it might be $100,000 or something like that.
I can look it up for you.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Eric.
So, in your opinion, the much of this additional cost that Ameren is putting you to, and that additional exposure we have, really has no beneficial effect at all.
No, it's a requirement that I had to adhere to in order to have a multi-tenancy. Either that I revert back to finding a tenant that can lease 8,000 square feet, that's second floor, ground floor, and basement.
So it won't help us here, but I wonder if we should make some sort of representation to our legislators, because Ameren is a publicly regulated utility, and they have to operate according to statutes. And if they're imposing financially burdensome requirements on commercial developers for no reason except perhaps to acquire some incremental monthly payment for each meter, that maybe that should be called to the legislators' attention.
Dennis.
Are you and your financial backers going to be able to sustain the business or the service of the building if you don't find that you're able to fill it with tenants in a manageable time period?
Say that again. I guess, would we be able to financially
maintain the ownership of the building if you're not able to fill it with tenants within the 6 months or a year?
Financially, we would float the building. We'd be able to float the building. We would just not activate it per the redevelopment agreement, and we'd probably incur a lien on the property.
Yeah.
Dan?
Okay, so now I'm more confused than before. As I understand it, you have to put in a separate panel for the top floor, the main floor, and the basement because you have multi-use tenants.
Right.
So 5 years down the line, that all changes and you get one tenant. Will you be required to change it all again?
Nope. We'll just pay the meter charges.
All the 3 meters?
Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
I'm prepared to move approval.
Is that a motion?
I move approval, yes. Therefore, I move.
Okay, and I'll pick up the second on that.
Okay, it's been moved by Eric Jacobson, seconded by Dennis Roberts.
I'm sorry,
Aaron.
I had another question.
Aaron.
So the $1 million that's left in TIF 2 would be enough to cover these expenses, though, if we wanted to pay out of TIF 2? If there was a request made and the receipts were produced, we could just pay out of TIF 2?
Yes, that is true, and that is what would happen were this property not scheduled to be removed from TIF 2. As a result, though, TIF 2 will be transferring fund balance to the central TIF to cover its startup expenses, including existing redevelopment agreements. So TIF 2, in essence, is still paying for this project, even though it's being moved to the central TIF.
And in the third paragraph, it says that the project at 129 North Ray Street is expected to assist the intent of the central TIF by reducing blighting factors, eliminating the dilapidation of the urban fabric. Are we saying that that building was considered blight because of what?
It had blighting factors because it had been vacant for over a year. It was not conducive to modern commercial usage, and we also found that out internally. So it has not been particularly market rate, and or marketable rather. Yeah, and then the maintenance of the property and the parking lot were beginning to be called into a question, which often happens when buildings are unoccupied for long periods of time.
So when we do TIF in residential areas, houses that need to be rewired or have more plumbing done or need to have the driveway fixed because it's cracking real bad, that would be considered blight or blighting factors?
Residential TIFs are very complicated and really beyond my understanding. They're very different and have a lot more criteria for both their eligibility and their what's considered eligible expenses in a residential context. Generally, we support the investment in commercial properties because, for example, the three-phase power on 3 different floors of the building allows for viable commercial tenant occupancy well into the future by future owners and future businesses because the building has been upgraded to the current code standards. I suppose you could make the same argument for a home, but it really is in a very different context than commercial properties in a central business district. But in TIF 3, our only truly residential TIF, there were many improvements made not to single-family homes but to the amenities around them, the streets, the lighting, the public parks, and improvements were made to the school, King School.
Okay, we have a motion that's been seconded to send this to council with a recommendation for approval. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Thank you.
I would just note that the council will have a budget amendment that accompanies this agreement at its next committee of the whole meeting that will be introduced by the finance department. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Next up is IDOT Traffic Task Force discussion. Was there a particular item? I don't see Alex here tonight, and the mayor's left.
Well, one thing I think we could discuss is the proposal that Darrell Cruz, or the card that Darrell brought forth which I thought was possibly pretty effective, especially in light of what was shared by Deputy Chief Sylvia Morgan about the response from a citizen, very positive response. So I'd like to get some feedback from the council as to what you think about this possible traffic stop survey card.
Dennis.
Well, we're looking for different ways of interfacing with the public and getting more data also from the traffic stops that are occurring. So this card could potentially be of use. We also want the police officers to be recording a lot more information during the stop about the causes for the stop, procedure, what evolves from the stop. So that's, of course, collected by the officer. I don't think that this being sent to the Human Relations Office is a bad idea. I suppose that if there was a complaint, then it would be filed, appropriately with the Civilian Police Review Board. So this being another option for getting public feedback seems to be, I guess, neutral in my mind, probably helpful. We might want to evaluate the different questions on a scale from 1 to 5. Decision to stop you was reasonable and legitimate. I'm not, from the point of view of the individual involved, I guess that's they have to be weighed with the intent of the police officer. But I guess we might as well get some feedback from it, and I suppose that this card is one way of doing it.
Bill.
I remember Chief Connolly said that they'd tried this before and there was a really low return rate. I don't think that should necessarily prohibit us from trying it again. I mean, if people don't return it, then they probably were neutral about the stop. They probably didn't think it was great, didn't think it was bad. So you'd probably get some extremes on the cards. I wondered if the way this is mocked up and represented, there's no way to connect the comments to a specific stop. I don't know if that's something that we would want to do, like have them put it on a ticket number, or would that prohibit them from returning it? I don't know if anybody else has any ideas, or if there's been research on what the best way to get the response rates is, or if we'd need that information.
Chief Connolly could possibly answer some of these questions.
Chief, have you seen it yet? You haven't seen it? Okay. Yeah, if I'm going to jump in here. I have a generally positive feeling about this, but at the same time, I'd like to get feedback from Alex about the questions just raised about how we could get good response rates. I do like the anonymity aspect of this, and but of course, it's always nice to be able to figure out a way to tie it into a particular type of incident. So maybe the chief and Alex and the new statistician could review exactly how to put this together. But we want to do more community engagement, so I think it is an appropriate tool. Bill.
Just the other thing, I mean, there are other cities that are doing online responses. I guess there's some obstacles to getting people to answer online, but the advantages are that you could probably delve into a little bit more detail and get automated analysis and graphing and statistics and stuff.
One aspect would be to make, have, if you want to answer this electronically, go to this website, blah, 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 and put in some information that way. I mean, so that would be an alternative to having them mail it back to us. So that's sort of the kind of feedback I'd want to get from Alex. Diane, and then Aaron.
I talked to Alex for a while on Friday. I had some questions about following up from last month's discussion about the task force. But anyway, the reason he's not here tonight is, and I thought I'd let you guys know, is Alex Bautista plus the Civilian Police Review Board Chair Grace Mitchell and the newest board member Mikhail Lubianski are all in Albuquerque for the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. So they're at a week-long conference. The Urbana Human Relations Office and the CPRB are both members of this organization, and they're gathering dozens of best practices regarding civilian oversight, and this organization is a nonprofit organization that brings individuals and agencies together to establish and improve oversight of police officers in the United States. And I think they may also be coming back with a lot of new and innovative ideas. So I'd certainly want Alex and the CPRB to look at the questions and the content of the card. Also, and Alex did say they're looking at ways to use online feedback better, so from the city's website. So anyway, they may have some input into the content of the card.
Aaron, then Eric. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to see us do both, then, if it was possible. I don't know, Chief. When did we try this before? The hard copies.
Probably within the last 8 years. We got less than 1% response.
How many did we give out?
I don't have that.
So it just seems like I don't know, it's a low cost effort from what I can see. I don't know, maybe it would be more than I expect, but we would get a chance for a person to have something in their hand immediately to return back. What is our percentage rate or response online? Did Alex say anything about that, Diane?
It's not up online yet.
So I'm totally in favor of having a mechanism or mechanisms, most effective possible mechanisms for citizens who are stopped to provide feedback. There would be, I think, extensive discussion about at least one of these items, but I don't think it's appropriate right now to embark on that discussion. But when Alex is back, when when there are materials that everybody has in common, including Chief Connolly ahead of time, yeah, I think we should definitely pursue this.
Okay. Maybe a motion to direct staff would be appropriate here, or request staff action on this. Dennis.
Well, maybe I would move to ask the Human Relations Officer to review the submitted card, add input from his recent discoveries at a convention, and bring back to us within 2 to 3 weeks more information or maybe a revised card for us to consider.
Okay. Do you want to hear about the electronic possibilities and
Yes,
or
that's fine.
and feedback from CPRB or whatever?
That's right, and I'd be interested in knowing about his opinions about a percent of return and what's the most likely way of getting appropriate information from these.
Okay. Is there a second to that?
Second.
Eric.
So, Chief Connolly, I'd like to ask you how you would want to, be engaged with this. The motion so far is simply to request Human Relations to provide. And are you comfortable with having Human Relations do that, and then you would react to what they do, or do you want to get involved earlier?
I would be happy to work with them.
Okay.
I would think that we could streamline this. The question by the officer, did the officer ask only questions directly related to the traffic stop, as an example? Yes or no, but with no explanation, I don't know what information that shares
Yeah.
with the council or anybody else. If they walk up, detect the odor of alcohol, and they stop them for speeding, they're going to
Right.
ask additional questions.
Yes,
So
that.
we would have to refine that.
Yeah, that question is the tricky one on this form that we're looking at. Yeah.
So I'm going to just simply assume that staff in general, work on this then. Yeah, is that appropriate, Dennis? Yeah.
Well, I would think that Alex would have a conversation with the police officer before he came back and talked to us.
Okay. Diane?
So can I follow up on another issue?
Yeah.
From last month?
Well, let's just,
are we-
so just show of hands, everybody in favor of doing this? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So
Diane?
last month, comments from the council, it was pretty clear that we put a pretty high priority on following up on recommendation 2.4, which is getting at the efficacy of traffic stops. And now that, and I'm glad to have met the statistician. So the reason I had called Alex in the first place was to find out what had happened in the month since we last talked about this, and he wasn't aware of exactly what had done. So I wondered, have we gotten any? Has the statistician actually started to work on this?
No, the statistician only started several weeks ago, and 1 week of it was training.
Okay.
So the answer is no.
Do we need an actual motion to request this be done, or do we?
Yeah, we had some items last week. Remember, or last month there was a set of 3 items that we sent forward. We didn't take a formal vote on that, but I assume that would be coming back as that information. That was indicated that they were going to start looking at those numbers. I actually reread the report last night. I have some ideas on some specific things, but if it may be that we want to, depending on the schedule, it might be that we could have a report from Alex in 2 weeks, given that he's not here tonight. I don't know how quickly he can react to what we've requested tonight, but we could at least get started, and maybe with another 2 weeks, Ms. Hayes would have some time to at least start thinking about it, and we can send her some questions. I'm just thinking off the top of my head here. Sorry.
Yeah, no, but I think the question that Diane raises is absolutely central. What is the role of traffic stops in preventing and solving crimes or investigatory stops? And that is the fault line around which all of these discussions revolve, and so we need to get that as right as we possibly can.
Aaron.
So something I wanted to read and make sure that we were clear about it as we move into a conversation about investigatory stops. The investigatory traffic stops based on hunches or trivial traffic violations is a bad policing practice. Casting a broad net does not serve the public interest. Investigatory stops are counterproductive to core crime-fighting mission of policing, that of service, fairness, equity, and safeguarding individual constitutional rights. Investigatory stops divide our community by race and ethnicity. There is no local data to support investigatory stops actually reduce crime and make our community safer than any other less intrusive policing tactics. So I am going to move that the Urbana City Council direct the UPD to discontinue the practice of conducting pretextual traffic stops for the purpose of further questioning or investigating the driver and or passengers unless justified by clear evidence of criminal behavior or of an overriding public safety issue.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Yeah, for the conversation ability, I'll second it.
Okay, it's been moved. There's a motion and a second here. Eric.
So I'm not a world expert on this, but I really immersed myself on this topic. And it's very clear that hotspot policing, more intensive policing in high crime areas really works. There's a lot of statistical evidence to that effect. And some of that is traffic stops. And I'm just going to give one example of a traffic stop. And this is the apprehension of the man who murdered half a dozen people in a church in South Carolina and then took off. And he was arrested in North Carolina because a citizen who had seen grainy video footage of this person leaving the scene of the crime saw somebody driving around who sort of fit that description and called the police. Police officer stopped that person. The person hadn't committed any traffic violations, but this was the guilty person who would very possibly have, committed further atrocious crimes. So I think that the question, now on the other hand, there's other statistical evidence. There's no question that investigatory stops are statistically over the nation applied in a manner that's racially biased. So I think what we have to think about very, very carefully is how do we get the right kind of balance for public safety that's associated with police officers utilizing their skills and their intelligence and all the tools they have on the one hand, but on the other hand, to minimize or eliminate, hopefully, the racial bias. And I believe, my personal belief, again, I'm open to more information and changing my mind. My personal belief is that the real key is very, very good training in implicit bias that we all have. I'm going to tell a story on myself about implicit bias. I don't think I've ever told anybody this. But a couple of years ago, Aaron, up in your neighborhood, going to the event that was associated with the proposal for the halfway house. And I've got my convertible and it's open. And it occurred to me, I was going to drive up there and park, and I had a brief thought, which I'm not proud of, and that's why I've never told anybody. Oh, maybe I should put the top up so I could lock the car, because I was going into your neighborhood. And then I said, no, that's wrong. So I didn't put the top up, but it was, I caught myself. And we're all subject to that, whether we're police officers or not. So we really have to work on that. We really have to have our police officers work on that. But we can't, at the same time, deprive the officers of the tools they need for public safety.
Can I respond to that, please? Sure. So, even in my motion, I clearly say that if this investigatory stop is justified by clear evidence of criminal behavior or an overriding public safety concern or issue, and it was clear that Dylan Roof was a problem for the world, not just for North Carolina. So it was perfectly reasonable and understandable that the police would use an investigatory stop to apprehend this mass murderer. I don't have a problem with that. I've said that over and over and over and over and over again. What we have a problem with is how does this council and the UPD propose that we deal with the overwhelming racial disparities that come outside of those isolated incidents that you described. That is what the problem is, and that's what we've been asked to deal with. And since the data shows that the investigatory stops are the ones that highlight the racial disparity unequivocally across the country, then why would this council or why would this police department have a problem under what I just proposed, unless you have clear evidence of a crime or some heinous or some issue with the public safety, then we won't do investigatory stops. I'd actually like to ask the chief a few questions about investigatory stops.
Chief, are you willing to sit over here on the microphone? Aaron, while Chief's moving, could you please email that motion to us?
Okay.
I guess I should start by saying, if in fact we had clear and convincing evidence, that's called probable cause, and we wouldn't need to further investigate a traffic stop. I think, I don't even know what investigatory stops, how are they defined, but if we have probable cause, we don't need any additional information. We would then effect the arrest. So I am 100% happy with working with the IDOT traffic study. I'm comfortable answering questions, general questions and working with Alex, but I really am asking for you not to prematurely jump into making decisions that are arbitrarily going to tie the hands of police officers who have to balance the investigative tools that are available through the Supreme Court and all the lower courts with trying to provide safety to our community.
So the question is there an internal oversight or review process to protect against officer abuse of investigatory stops?
There's an oversight starting with me watching a video at least once a week. Deputy Chief Sylvia Morgan watching a video. These are random traffic stops that we review. Each lieutenant watching 3 videos, each sergeant watching 3 videos. So the answer is yes. We routinely have an oversight to ensure that they are in compliance with the policy, that their equipment is working properly, and that they're acting professionally.
So you review all the officers' stops or just
No,
right.
we randomly select, I randomly select one, Deputy Chief Morgan randomly selects one, the lieutenant randomly select 3, the sergeants under their span of control randomly select 3.
And what I'm speaking to are the investigatory stops. I'm not just saying like random stops.
Traffic stops.
But so you don't know if they are an investigatory stop that you're reviewing?
If I see one and I pick that random stop and it's an investigatory stop, then the answer is yes.
But you don't have a particular process or review.
Define for me an investigatory stop, please.
Well, you know this person for possibly having an ordinance for smoking marijuana last week, and they have a license plate light out, and you want to see if they still have some marijuana on them, so you stop them.
Okay, that's not an investigatory stop.
What
That's a
kind of
pretextual stop. An investigatory stop is we are driving down the street, we receive information that an armed robbery, a bank robbery just occurred, and a person left in a blue vehicle. And the person was described as a male. And we see what we appear to be a male pass us 2 blocks from the bank in a blue car at a high rate of speed. We, at that point, have established enough reasonable suspicion to effect an investigatory stop on that vehicle based on the totality of the circumstances. Stopping someone for a tail light for the purpose of identifying them or determining whether or not we detect the odor of cannabis is a pretextual stop, which I thought the city attorney shared some information with you folks about. Not yet? No. Okay. Okay. So that's the difference between the two.
So do the UPD officers receive formal training on when and how to conduct investigatory stops?
Routinely. Routinely. As a matter of fact, Sergeant Andy Charles just reviewed that, well, not specific to investigatory or pretextual, but to all traffic stops included in those.
Is it done in-house or at PTI?
Both.
And do the command officers direct beat officers to conduct them in certain neighborhoods or hotspots?
Do they direct them to? No.
Okay. So most of the investigatory stops are left to each officer's discretion?
investigatory or pretextual?
Both.
Okay. Are they left to the discretion?
Yeah.
Well, I would probably say that's a difficult question to answer, because if we had, for instance, a series of residential burglaries or home invasions, and we have developed a suspect vehicle description, we may very well direct our surveillance team to focus on this type of vehicle, and therefore we would be ordering them to monitor and establish enough reasonable suspicion or probable cause to identify that vehicle, to identify the home invader. So it's difficult for me to say arbitrarily that we do or don't. It's case specific.
So the investigatory stops, as you describe them, is when you get a tip or something of that nature, and you, like what Eric described, that was an investigatory stop for Dylan Roof in North Carolina, the one that he just described.
No, I don't know what the details of the purpose of the traffic stop was. An investigatory stop is, we just had a bank robbery. The vehicle is a blue Chevrolet four-door, and we see a blue Chevrolet four-door driving in front of us. That's an investigatory stop.
Mm-hmm. So it was something similar to that. I was just trying to make sure I understand the difference between...
Similar to what?
To what Eric described as what happened in the case of Dylan Roof when he was stopped in North Carolina. The police had been given some sort of tip about what the person looked like or what they may have been driving or something like that.
Mm.
So that was an investigatory stop.
Yes.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Dennis.
Now that I know what an investigatory stop is, I realize that I was stopped for an investigatory stop when I was camping one time as a younger person.
Sure.
We had been camping out in the Arizona desert, and we were coming home at 11 o'clock at night, and the police pulled us over, and I was kind of figuring out why they stopped me. And it turned out that they had seen a car similar to mine driving erratically at the other end of town, and they thought, well, that's him, and they stopped me. Well, it wasn't me. I had just pulled into town, and the thing that saved me from spending a night in jail, I suppose, was the fact that my car had all kinds of red mud on it from being out in the desert. And he said, well, we don't have that kind of red mud here, so I guess it wasn't you. That's about as far as it went, but I realized now that's an investigatory stop. There was no actual true reason that I had done anything. In particular, I was just driving through town. But I was in a vehicle similar to one that was a suspicious vehicle unbeknownst to me.
So, Chief, the last question for me is, given the, as what Eric said, investigatory stops are applied in a manner that is racially biased, and it's very clear evidence of that across the country. Is there a proposal? Are you guys working on something to address that?
Address. I'm sorry. What is the proposal by the police department? What are you asking? I guess I'm confused.
Well, investigatory stops are applied across the country in a manner that is racially biased, right?
I don't know that.
Okay. So I'm telling you that that's the case. That data shows that all over the country. And that is what the
that
data shows.
Investigatory stops are racially biased across the nation? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
And so that is also the case here. So do you have a particular plan to address the racial disparity?
Well, maybe we could. I don't have an answer for you tonight. I'm sorry.
Let me jump in here. I'm a little concerned here that pretextual stops are being confused with investigatory stops on a national basis. And maybe Jim can jump in here and then we need to try to figure this out here.
Well,
So,
just let me say, Charlie, that investigatory stops, from a qualitative standpoint, I won't even get into the actual data, on a routine basis, what Dennis described as a situation where his car was identified. This happens in the African American community on a regular basis, that the person fits a particular description. even when the description is completely off base. So investigatory stops are also very heavily skewed and racially biased as well. So I don't want us to get that construed, but the pretextual stops are certainly a problem, for sure, around race as well.
Let me give a little bit of a primer. The Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution prohibits unreasonable, warrantless searches and seizures. A traffic stop is considered a seizure. There can be a search incident to that stop or seizure, even for a fairly brief moment to issue a warning with no further investigation, no dog sniff. That is deemed a seizure. The U.S. Supreme Court has held that reasonably brief stops, traffic stops, are constitutional. Unfortunately, by the way, the discrimination aspect does not come into effect whatsoever in a Fourth Amendment stop. The Wren decision by the United States Supreme Court has held motive is not an element or to be considered in whether a search or a seizure is constitutional. However, that's not to say motive doesn't play in terms of constitutional issues. It's covered under the Equal Protection Clause. So let's go back to searches and seizures. Unfortunately, the courts, as you all are doing here, are confusing investigatory stops and pretextual stops. Let's keep it in the context of traffic stops, and I'm not going to be talking about statistics or whether police departments discriminate or not. The statistics are whatever they show. An investigatory stop does not require a traffic stop to effectuate, much like Alderperson Jacobson said and Chief Conley said. If there is probable cause or a articulable, reasonable belief, as the courts have held, to make a stop to investigate an arrest, you don't need a taillight or speeding or any other kind of a violation. The example that Alderperson Jacobson gave is an excellent example. Male, 28 years old, driving a blue car, and I don't know what car this fellow was driving, and somebody stops because they have a reasonable belief that the person driving that car and the car match the church shooter. There's no ticket going to be issued in that traffic stop. That person's going to be stopped, he's going to be investigated, and either he is going to be arrested or he's not. That's a perfectly lawful use of an investigative stop. Unfortunately, pretextual stops are, in most people's mind, all deemed illegal. They are not all deemed illegal. A pretextual stop is a traffic stop for some kind of traffic violation that is used in part to conduct an investigation, as Alderperson Ammons described. If the traffic stop, if there's a reasonable belief that a traffic violation, whether it's an equipment violation or a moving violation, has occurred, that traffic stop is lawful and constitutional. At the time of the stop, if there is an articulable, reasonable belief or probable cause that a separate crime is being committed, has been committed, or will be committed, a reasonable extension of that stop, very briefly to investigate, is lawful. The problem comes when there is a reasonable, articulable, reasonable suspicion of a traffic violation and a stop is made, but there is no articulable, reasonable suspicion of some other crime, where the stop is used to then create the articulable suspicion. Now you get into problems, and that's unconstitutional. For example, a traffic stop randomly made to check whether somebody has a valid driver's license, registration, and insurance without any belief that one or both of those are lacking has been held unconstitutional. There are two cases all relate to Illinois. The Cabalas case, a U.S. Supreme Court case, and I can't remember the second case, but they're almost identical. And the U.S. Supreme Court held the stop perfectly legal. Traffic stop, and if I'm not mistaken, they both involved dog sniff stops. The Supreme Court held one perfectly lawful. The Illinois Supreme Court held under a very similar circumstance to be unlawful. So there's no absolute, stating the principles is easy. Applying them is not. The key is if somebody is stopped and then they are detained to make an investigation without reasonable belief, that's unconstitutional. And if they're detained too long, for instance, there is a stop, it lasts less than 10 minutes because of a valid traffic stop, and while the traffic ticket is being processed, a warning or a citation, and a dog sniff is completed within that same, let's say 8 minutes, the U.S. Supreme Court has held that constitutional. However, if a stop is made, a person's detained, the ticket processing, which includes the citation and the checking of the license, the checking of the registration, the checking of insurance, and then another 10 minutes after that's processed in order to call out another officer to do a dog sniff, that's illegal under the Constitution.
So, thank you, Jim, for a fabulous breakdown of the law. It was a time when two black people couldn't walk down the street together because it was against the law, and the Supreme Court upheld that too. I'm not talking about all the legal aspects of this. I'm saying black people get stopped, and we tired of being stopped all the time more than our driving population. I'm asking this council, my chief of police, what is the city of Urbana going to do to address that finally? That is the question that is on the floor. And until we accept the fact that that's happening, I don't know where any movement is going to go.
For a year and a half, this has been studied by a task force assigned by the mayor. All of the recommendations were provided to you folks. You folks were going to discuss them, provide feedback, and then we were going to start to address the concerns. So that's the answer.
So what is being, we've given you some feedback.
The feedback to say just don't enforce the law isn't a logical response to this problem. So what we were going to do, apparently, was work with the human relations folks to try to balance the concerns that the task force raised with us still being able to prevent people from getting shot and killed or hurt or burglarized or all the other issues that our community is facing on a daily basis.
And you're saying that the disparities that exist within the traffic stops stop all of that?
Not even remotely. I am saying that the Illinois State Police 2 weeks ago stopped a car for speeding, something that 6 cents isn't right in Danville, and they find that the driver of that car was responsible for killing somebody in Colorado as well as stealing the vehicle, but yet the vehicle wasn't entered in the computer program yet. So the reality is we have to, as a law enforcement agency, what we have to do is balance our training and experience and our ability to be able to provide services to our community and keep the people in our community safe, with certainly the rights established by the U.S. Supreme Court and all the lower courts.
So,
Can we stop the debate? No, I don't want to debate.
I don't
this
understand
is not appropriate
how you
for
get
debate.
to dictate whether or not I want to debate, though. I don't understand that. If I have a concern in response to something the chief said, how do you cut that off?
Yeah,
how do you have the right to do that?
I just want to try to keep things.
I understand you saying what
civil.
you want.
No, I'm just trying to keep things civil. Okay.
And because I'm asking a question, I'm being uncivil, Charlie?
I'm not stopping you from asking. I'm just asking you to let others jump in here too.
So, well, when I have the floor, it's my turn, and then you call on other people. Is that how that works?
Aaron, you're out of order.
I'm out of order for trying to hold the floor because I have it?
We're in a debate situation between you and the chief of police as opposed to asking questions. Let's keep it to questions. He just answered one that you asked me, and I want to keep it civil. That's all, Aaron. So let's, if we could.
I just want to say, Charlie, that I am really sick of you making these comments about my civility. right? I am asking questions, burning questions that have affected the black community, and in particular is a heavy weight around the city of Urbana, who claims to be so progressive all the time, but really doesn't care a whole lot about what happens to black people in this particular city. That is how we really feel. And I'm just trying to ask questions that I think are pertinent to the chief of police, right?
And you
who's in charge of
you
that.
got a second tonight on this issue. Okay, I've asked you to send that motion around.
And I sent it around.
Okay, thank you. So we can look at it. Okay, but I would like to give other people a chance to speak
And they
here
can't
too.
speak
That's
when
all.
I'm done? If I
Okay.
have the floor, Charlie?
Well, we also we have a rule that we don't enforce about how much time each of us takes in some of these things.
So you're going to enforce it tonight?
No, I'm not going to enforce it. Part of that is when we are debating things back and forth and so on. But we do want to allow time for others. But please, I'm asking you to keep your questions as questions as opposed to a debating style of questions. There's a slight distinction there. That's all I'm asking. Please keep it as a question, and we'll go from there. So, Aaron, your question.
So, Chief, you just said that there was an officer who, through a sixth sense, sensed that something was wrong and this person was arrested for a murder someplace else, right? And so my question to you is, couldn't an officer in the city of Urbana have a sixth sense of some of the stops that are not happening? Let me be as clear as possible. African Americans are stopped at almost twice the rate of our driving population. The white population is stopped at less than the amount of their driving population. So if we were stopping white folks at the same rate that we were stopping black people, like twice the rate, wouldn't we have some opportunities to address some other forms of crime that are taking place based upon the logic that is currently being used?
I don't know.
Dennis.
Well, I was going to ask the chief a little bit about when the situation when an officer has a sense that there's something more going on than originally expected during the stop. And my guess is that there are signs that occur through the action of the occupants of the car that are signals which an officer who's trained begins to pick up. And if there are no, say, guilty glances or whatever the signals might be, quickly covering something up in the back seat or whatever it's going to be, then it's unlikely that the person who's going to be stopped is going to be further investigated, I'm guessing. So I do believe that there probably are what you would call signals that an officer does, quote, pick up through the interaction that indicate that there may be more going on than surface can tell. And so we can't determine what that's going to be based on just choosing to either stop or not stop at a ratio that seems to be arbitrary or set by the City Council of Urbana. I don't want to limit the law enforcement of the community to stop making its comprehensively attuned observations during these instances. So I do have a problem, I think, putting a quota on or advancing the idea that there needs to be a quota set to forgiveness of traffic stops based on whatever the ratio is of the population in the community. And that's what I'm wondering about.
Dan.
Well, I would like to address the contention that this council and previous councils don't care about the black community in this city. and I think that's absolutely irresponsible to say that. This previous council established a civilian police review board. It's there's several different intensities and level of oversight that these boards can provide, and the council that established this chose the one that was appropriate for the city of Urbana. I know people have criticized or claim it's not a perfect process, but it certainly is a reasonable and accessible avenue for people to pursue. And they're currently looking at ways to make the complaint process even easier for people. Secondly, the this council established the task force to look at racial disparities in traffic stops, which was a huge step forward. And we have an entire set of recommendations from this task force that we should be addressing. The Community Coalition was established 5 or 6 years ago in Champaign following the tragic death of Kewan Carrington in Champaign. Since then, it has grown to be a very broad-based initiative where there's very direct communication between members of the community, law enforcement, and Champaign and Urbana. And for many years, Chief Connolly was the only representative from the city of Urbana attending that. And about 2.5 years ago, I started going, and now a few more people are. But those meetings are held monthly to facilitate communication between the community and the police. The Fresh Start initiative, which is about to launch, we've been working hundreds of hours to address the specific issue of gun violence, which disproportionately has impacted the black community. It's resulted in the death of several innocent people, as well as a whole lot of other people who have been victims of gun violence in different areas of town. The city is paying for the human relations officer, that Grace Mitchell, and a member of the CPRB to attend this conference in New Mexico, which is a real reflection of this city's commitment to civilian oversight and addressing issues and learning from other communities how to apply the best possible policies we can get. And we are holding, well, I'll stop there. So to say that this council or anyone on this council or anyone in this community doesn't care about anything is absolutely irresponsible, because the actions that this council and this city have done over the last few years refutes that. And I am willing, my motion tonight would be to request officially that we compile the statistics that would permit, and this, I'm not making the motion, but I want to look at the evaluation of the effectiveness of these traffic stops, and quoting from the report itself, gathering these particular statistics would permit an evaluation of these stops as a crime-fighting tool, which could then be used as a basis for policy decisions. And if we're going to wholesale change policing policy and practice in this city, we better have a basis for doing that.
Eric, would you take the chair, please?
Okay, and Charlie?
Yeah, well, I think the issue here is that we have a list of task force recommendations. We're moving very slowly on them. It is clear from the step data and the accident data that we have a different set of numbers, okay? The black community under some categories is disproportionately stopped more than white folks. Okay, there is a problem there. Something's going on. Okay, so I understand Aaron is impatient to fix that. Okay, I want to see it fixed. I've brought stuff, I've tried to keep the process going by bringing written materials. Okay, I'm looking at Aaron's motion. It's a reasonable one, but as Diana says, if we're going to make that kind of policy change, it needs to be driven by some numbers. We started talking about it last time. I've got a list here in front of me that I didn't have time to finish editing to put it on paper and make a motion, but it goes along with what Diane said here. You know, you can use the demographics of the STEP program as a goal for all traffic stops, okay? You know, that may be a better number than the census numbers, based on the conversation we had a month ago. Whether it's investigatory stops or pretextual stops, especially the pretextual stops, we can look at how there's specific data for violations. You know, is it equipment violations, registration fees not paid, improper lane usage, and we can get racial breakdowns of how many get warning tickets versus an actual ticket, how many folks get more than one ticket. Those are things that our statistician can work on. We can dig deeper into the traffic stops, and I'm just going to throw out a bunch of stuff here, but I haven't had time to really put it in a good format here, working with a friend on the ACLU, she gave me a number of ideas here, you know, if the equipment violations are a pretense for a stop, we need to break down to see, you know, how many were arrested, what were they arrested for, was there an outstanding warrant, was there a lost license, or was it license related? Is it a weapons violation? You know, there's a whole list of things that come out of these pretextual stops, and let's see the data. And then of course the drug sniff data. There's the drug sniff data. You know, what can we get out of stops where a dog is brought in and there's a dog sniff situation. So all of that can be broken down, and then we can make an educated policy decision. So, you know, though I understand where Aaron is coming from, it's being shown around the country that it's being violated, but, you know, this is Urbana. We've tried to be better than the rest of the country. Let's prove that we're better than the rest of the country, and let's get the data. And then if there's a real problem there, we need to fix it.
And we would be able to provide a lot of that information. If we walk up to a car and see an open container of alcohol, our probable cause is established. I don't want to give you the numbers because I don't have them specifically, and I'm always seem to share information and then it's somehow regurgitated throughout the community. But I think we had 13 consent searches in the entire year. So several thousand traffic stops, and we had 13 consent searches, or 14 or 15 dog sniffs out of the entire year. So we can track that data. We already do. We can also track the data that says we stop someone simply because they don't have any registration. Their driver's license is suspended. There's an outstanding warrant for their arrest. We can track all of that information. We're just going to have to, I don't know how, we're going to have to work on how we figure out whether it's pretextual.
Okay. We also started asking for more information on could you remind us what it is, what's the additional information that we are collecting that we didn't used to?
The motive for the stop, whether it was community caretaking, whether it was hotspot policing, as Eric suggested, or whether it was traffic related. We had a individual struck by a car on University Avenue. We're focusing our attention through selective traffic enforcement on that area. In those cases, we are now tracking that. The question asked earlier by Diane was, have we analyzed that data yet? And the answer is, as I shared with you, Melissa still doesn't know the computer systems, although she's getting there very quickly. Hopefully, we will start to be able to present some of that information to you.
Okay, so Aaron?
Yeah, so since I was addressed in Diane's comments, I'll respond to that. First of all, the Human Relations Office is not an office here to serve the black community. So because Alex and some other folks are in New Mexico trying to find out some information about oversight of the police, the whole country wants oversight of the police, not just the Urbana Police Department. So to say that that's being done strictly to address the black community is more than a stretch. The Fresh Start program, I went to go visit the Fresh Start program. I don't really want to blast the Fresh Start program. I think it may have some benefits, but there's far more time being spent on the policing aspect and far more resources being given to the policing aspect than will ever be given to the resources aspect of the Fresh Start program. You know that, and I know that to be true as well. So to say that that's something specifically designed to address the issues that we have with the police department in the black community is absolutely not correct, and you know it's not correct. So, looking at the task force data, you're absolutely correct. We've looked at it. And we've been told, and you have been told on this council, because you've been here for 12 years, that the racial disparities are alive and well. Daryl gave you the numbers this evening, 30% more than our driving population. 12 years of consent searches and dog sniffs, all kind of different stuff we have been laying out for over a decade. So to talk about irresponsible, that's irresponsible from my perspective. And I'll go a little bit further for you. Do you have any summer youth programs for the African American youth or even the other youth in the city? No, you don't. You haven't paid for that. I'm not done yet. You'll get your turn. And so I'm going to go on and highlight something that's a big problem that I see happening in the city, period. So now I can't help but to recognize that out of 22 city representatives and staff in this room tonight, 20 are white. 2 of us are African American. The 2 African Americans are elected or appointed officials. So if we remove all of the elected representatives, then the 13 hired staff are all white. Of course, the Human Resource Officer and the Human Relations Officer are African American and Latino respectively. But in this room tonight, the city of Urbana is not reflective of its demographic, and nor is it in the city as a whole. I raise this in the context of the stated goals of diversity and in the context of this racial disparity in the city and in traffic stops that we have been discussing and, in my opinion, explaining away. Since I was appointed to this council, and even before that, the city has set diversity as an important goal, and yet the last 5 hires that I'm aware of, 4 of which took place in the 2 least diverse departments in the city, all of the new hires are white. So since this progressive city of Urbana is not sincerely committed to diversity internally, it's not surprising to me that the racial disparities in traffic stops continue to be dismissed and essentially ignored. That's your irresponsibility for you.
Diane.
May I correct some inaccuracies in your statement? First of all, I've been on the council 7 years, not 12 years. Secondly, yes, there is a summer youth program. The 2nd year of it was this year. It was expanded from the pilot program last year, and yes, it served African American youth, as did many other programs under the umbrella of the Community Coalition. And we'll just let it go there. And if you want to look at inequity on this council, there should be more women on this council.
But we're not talking about gender. See, this is what happens. We've been talking about race, and as soon as that happens, we got to bring up something different to just not focus on what the real issue is, right? That's what the real issue is.
I happen to feel very alone up here.
Except when the mayor is up here, so imagine how I feel, right?
We have a motion. Any further discussion? Bill?
Just to the motion, I think it's too early to make any kind of assumptions about what our data will show. I think we don't even know how many pretextual stops we make. We have a hard time identifying what our pretextual stops are and what the results are, what the impact of on the African American community is. So, I think we've started this process. We need to see it through, and it wouldn't help to jump to conclusions before we get more data and more discussion.
Are you suggesting that we table the motion or send it to the task? Or
no, I'm willing to vote on it.
Any others? All those in favor?
Of the motion that I made?
Yes.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Nay.
No.
The motion fails.
Shocking.
Diane, did you have a motion?
Yes, I'll submit a motion. I would direct the UPD and the Human Relations Officer to compile statistics that would permit an evaluation of the efficacy of investigatory traffic stops, although I'm thinking now the
Pretextual.
task force may have been interchanging those two.
Yeah, so we...
Well, let me finish the
Oh,
motion.
sure, okay.
So either investigatory, pretextual as a crime-fighting tool as per recommendation 2.4 from the final report of the Urbana Traffic Stop Data Task Force, Volume 1.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion directing. Could you repeat who it's to?
UPD and HRO
Okay.
to compile statistics.
Okay,
That
thank
would
you.
permit an evaluation of the efficacy of the pretextual / investigatory traffic stops.
Okay, discussion.
Yeah,
Eric.
I can just clarify that when during the task force discussions and in our recommendations, basically we considered two kinds of traffic stops. We considered traffic stops that were done motivated primarily or entirely by a violation, an equipment or moving violation, or traffic stops where there was a major part of the motivation was something other than that. So we did lump investigatory and pretextual stops together in our thinking.
So is it possible to split them apart then, and as part of this analysis, from the data that's there?
I think that's the question for combination of Alex and Chief Connolly and the statistician to ponder, and then for us to think about.
Okay. Further discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, item 10 is any further discussion on the IDOT traffic?
No.
Okay, it is 9:30. We have an hour left. Item number 11, ordinance number 2016-988, an ordinance amending Urbana City Code, Chapter 20, Section 2615, advertising on or in a Urbana. Public Works.
Thank you. For those of you who don't know, Barb Steele is assistant to the Public Works Director, and she did a lot of the research on a couple of questions that we were asked to explore a few weeks ago. One, maybe this will be the shorter version first, was a question about access to curbanas or parklets. Generically, a curbana is generally called a parklet in communities throughout the United States, and sidewalk cafes. To clarify, in the Urbana license agreement under paragraph B, section 3, the licensee may not restrict ingress, egress to the property during the time periods of such license, except as needed to comply with current liquor laws. So essentially, if someone has their own sandwich and they want to sit into a parklet or curbana, they can do that. But for serving purposes, whether it's food and or alcohol, the serving of folks in a parklet would only be by that person that has the license. So it couldn't be 3 doors down, restaurant X coming to serve someone at Crane Alley restaurant, for example. So hopefully that clarifies the question that was raised a few weeks ago. No, the next item is then...
Bill, if I,
oh, sure.
Yeah, okay, so specifically, if I go pick up a pizza at store down the road and come and sit in one of the two curbanas...
That's permissible.
That's permissible?
Yes.
Okay. So people pack a brown bag of lunch, they can go sit there?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And it's stated in the license.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Now, the second item, which is a bit more need of discussion, is with respect to signage on curbanas. The memo is fairly lengthy. It goes into some of the background of just the Urbana program. I think most of you know it started in 2014 at 2 locations. We're now in the 3rd season, and I think they continue to do well by all casual observations by myself and surveys that have been conducted in the past. We thought it would be helpful, and Barb did this research of checking communities throughout the United States for parklets. Again, those are spaces within the street parking space area. And do they or do they not permit advertising? And it's pretty clear, at least in the cities that have parklets, that they do not have such signage or advertising in those spaces. So I thought it was important for you to know that. Now, Champaign, our neighbor next door to us to the west, does not have any parklets to speak of. They do have sidewalk cafes, but they don't have parklets. I think that might have been a question that some of you may have had last time. But back to then the question of advantages of allowing advertising in a Urbana and disadvantages of allowing advertising in a Urbana. We kind of stepped through each of those pros and cons, if you will. Hopefully you had a chance to look at that. I don't plan to revisit the specifics of them all, but we thought that if we do proceed with allowing signage, that there be some regulations. And the 7 or 8 regulations we outlined on page 3, we thought that was helpful just to let everyone know that these are concerns that we have if this was to proceed. Lastly, then, we have an ordinance attached that essentially changes section 20-615, line 12, that basically would allow advertising shall be permitted on or in a sidewalk cafe having a valid city license to operate a Urbana or parklet pursuant to the Urbana pilot program. And then we further talk about no other advertising shall be permitted on or in any sidewalk cafe except the sandwich board portable sign. We remove that second part of the sentence that says that advertisees, daily specials, or sales for a business. Again, we don't want to get into the specifics of what signage is appropriate on a sandwich board. So that's what we wanted to provide to you, and looking for any direction.
Dennis.
Can I just do general discussion? I don't have a question necessarily for Bill, except
I
for
do
Vince.
have one question here,
Okay,
just
go
to
ahead, then.
understand.
Why don't you go ahead?
Anyone else have a question? Okay, Bill, what I don't, okay, so you've got this ordinance and it says shall be permitted if, having valid city license, but you don't include the proposed regulations, or how, you've got these proposed regulations here. How do those come into the ordinance?
Generally, a regulation won't. That would be our procedure for implementing, and they would probably be added on to the actual permit itself. But
okay, I see. So
So how do you affix a sign to a Urbana, for example?
Okay.
That would be part of our procedure, and that's the instructions we would give to either permittee.
Okay, I understand that. Okay, and then would there be, you haven't indicated, I don't know if you've indicated a recommendation one way or the other here, but would this be the kind of thing where we would try it for a year or two just to see how it works?
That would be probably my recommendation. I think it's important, and legal has made it abundantly clear to us that we can't control content of the signage. So I think that's an important consideration, and I think that jumped out at us when we did the research, that there must be a reason why signage is not permitted in parklets in these major cities.
Okay, and then so my last question is, New York City has it advertising only allowed on valance of awnings for sidewalk cafe. Exactly. So there's an awning over the sidewalk, then there's not a, they don't.
It's not on the Urbana or the parklet. They don't allow any advertising on their parklets.
Okay, okay.
I think the example that you saw the last time was from a sidewalk cafe. It was not a what you'd consider a curbside cafe or a parklet, because they don't allow those.
Okay, the examples that were shown then were...
When Mr. Cho was showing some pictures of what he was envisioning, those were from sidewalk cafes.
Those were on subs.
So they were
okay.
adjacent to the restaurant.
Oh, okay, I see. Okay, that's the distinction.
Yeah.
Okay. And so the kind of thing I've seen in Spain, for example, they are disconnected. They're across they're out in the median, and they're marked much like the Urbanas. But there it's, you know, the waiters are running across the street and through parked cars. It's pretty amazing, but that's how it works. Okay. Dennis.
Well, then I have a question. So what your ordinance proposes is that signage be allowed, but it's going to be the same A-frame, what is it called, signboard? Or what is it called?
No.
It's called...
That would be something that would be either affixed to the Urbana or in a separate frame system.
Well, well, it says that no other advertising shall be permitted on or in any sidewalk cafe, a Urbana, i.e., right? Although you didn't say Urbana, except a sandwich board portable sign. Is that what I'm reading? This is section
It's saying that
12.
they can have advertising, but it's saying no other advertising
Yes.
shall be permitted
Whatever
on the sidewalk cafe. And so there's a difference between the Urbanas and sidewalk cafes. The sidewalk cafe would be on the sidewalk area, and then the Urbanas are from the curb to the end of a parking space towards the street, if that makes sense.
So what you're not saying is what I thought. What I thought you were saying was that a sandwich board would be permitted on the Urbana, but you're saying no.
No, sandwich boards are currently permitted on the sidewalk.
Yes, but you're not. Are you also now saying you could have one on a Urbana?
No.
There
No,
probably wouldn't
you're
be
not.
room.
There wouldn't
I
be
mean,
room for
it
that.
would be.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
We're not allowing signage, if you will, on the sidewalk cafes, okay? Only in the parklets, which we call Urbanas. And that was
So
the direction given to
you're
us.
willing to have signage on a Urbana?
No, that's what you directed us to look at.
To come up with an ordinance. So we came up with the ordinance that complied with what you asked us to do.
The direction was to permit signage on the two Urbanas or parklets.
Right, but you don't indicate how the size of it, what it's made out of?
Well, we
That'll
get
be
into
in the
that.
license
That would be,
agreement,
yeah.
and that's what those last proposed regulations would be. And that would be included in the license agreement.
Are they
So
spelled out?
for example,
Do you
that we
spell them out
didn't.
here?
I'm sorry, what?
Do you spell them out here? You're saying they would be in the regulations, but
Right.
But these are still not specified yet.
We're saying things like that they can't be reflective. So in other words, if you're driving down the street at night, it doesn't distract you, because when your lights hit it, that it will draw people's attention away from the roadway.
Okay, but
And
you're
yeah.
not indicating size.
No, the
There's
size
not a
would-
The
limitation.
last one does.
The size and placement of the signage shall be limited to the area around the three outside edges of the
Okay,
Urbana.
so you're saying it could be wrapping around the entire thing?
Yes.
All right. Well, okay, so thank you, and if I can say my point of view is that that's not a very good thing to have in the city. I don't want to turn a city-owned facility and amenity into a signboard, billboard. I mean, I wouldn't support that in the least.
Eric.
Yeah, I think I agree with Dennis in this case. The Urbanas are such a wonderful amenity. They look great. They're wonderful places to be in. They're wonderful places to look at. And there isn't a sufficiently... I have sometimes voted for things that I don't especially like aesthetically because it was really important to the city economically. The gambling places especially. But I don't see a really compelling economic advantage to this that is in any way commensurate with what I think would be the degradation of the visual environment and the entire, ambiance of the area.
Dennis.
And, and the other thing I noticed about, within the material we were provided was that the rental of the Urbana for the year is $250. That's the fee. But they cost the city $25,000 to...
For both of them, right.
For both, okay. So maybe half of that. But so that was like about so that the renter is paying, I assumed it was 1% of the cost of the city for a season, a whole entire year of use of the Urbana, which seemed to me an incredibly cheap purchase for an amenity that the city's provided at rather a large expense, plus the labor to put it together. I would much prefer seeing people sitting sitting and enjoying themselves by being able to actually visually see them through the railing as I'm passing through the city. And we talked about beautification of the Urbanas. We originally considered planters, flowers to enhance the effect on the city view from the streetscape. So to wrap it in a vinyl sign that was 2.5 feet wide and 40 feet long with the advertising of a certain particular business is antithetical to me to that goal. I think it's important that the businesses adequately signage their own storefronts, but I don't see the city amenity of a Urbana, which is provided to enhance the city, to become a personal billboard for a company.
Bill.
I guess there's other restrictions we could consider as far as size of lettering or total space of the sign or identification, placemaking, identification. Personally, I wouldn't like to see something wrapped in a big sign with big letters and blaring advertising, but it seems like what we would want or what we could strive for would be some sort of divider or canvas that could wrap the between the railings, that could have more colorful graphics, more of abstract graphics or abstract logo, small lettering. But I don't know if there's any way to. We wouldn't be controlling content, just design a little bit. So maybe we could kind of keep looking at this.
I have a question for Jim. Since these are owned by the city, technically, and on city space, and located by permit, if the city provided the wrap, say on 3 sides, and we paid for the wrap and the content and did whatever we want, we would be able to do that, right?
Partly. Yeah, it's never that easy.
Okay.
Under Reed versus Town of Gilbert, a very, very complex U.S. Supreme Court opinion where there obviously was a majority. You have to start out with, you cannot regulate content. The simplest way to determine whether you're regulating content is if you have to read the sign to see whether it complies, you are regulating content. So you can't limit the advertising. Of course, you're getting into a little bit different area because you're talking about placing advertising on city property. The Urbanas are city property.
No, that's not my question. If the city pays for...
The issue is not who pays for it. The issue is, are the regulations separate from content rationally based compared to other restrictions on signage? You just can't arbitrarily pick size and shape. Obviously, tying the signs down, durable material, non-reflective, that kind of thing.
No. I don't think you're understanding my question. I'm saying that if we don't do this, we don't permit signage.
Owners. Okay.
Right. We don't. We'll start. We don't permit signage, but in turn, if we wanted to beautify these curbanas, as suggested by Bill, with some graphic design around them, and maybe even something that says, okay, you know, this year we put a little sticker or whatever that identifies that this is business X.
Identifies what?
If we identify the business that is associated with that curbana for the current year, but at our expense, can we control
We
the
certainly
content?
can put, I guess, the equivalent of a vinyl wrap, kind of like part of a fence, but a vinyl wrap around the curbana, and it can have, you know, graphics like you see the graphics on, you know, windows of the I think it's the parking garage. Certainly we can do that. We can certainly use our logo, the Leaf logo or Urbana or anything like that, because it's our advertising. And you know, it's not a matter of regulating somebody else's speech, it's regulating our own speech. If you want, I think you could put this Urbana licensed by Granale or whoever.
Exactly.
Okay.
So you've just provided an alternative.
Okay, but you have to be careful that if because it's on right-of-way, as Bill and Barb indicated, if the curbana is open for me to bring my sandwich, to sit down, you have to be careful. Is that sign going to implicitly discourage me, who has no interest in buying any food from the establishment that's licensed the curbana, if it's going to inhibit me from doing that? I haven't done the legal research on that. But you just have to be, my suggestion would be, you have to be somewhat careful. Can you put your own sign up, City of Urbana? Sure. Or your own graphics or decorative art? Absolutely.
Dennis.
I don't think it's a good idea to wrap the curbanas at all. That just creates a visual barrier to what the activity of a cabana is all about, which is to enjoy seeing people enjoying themselves on the city streets. So if you're going to wrap it and you're going to hide it by putting some kind of graphic, no matter whether it's leaves or a billboard, you know, you're defeating the purpose. Now, if the city council wants to allow signage on the cabana, I'd rather see a 16 by 20 sign with, you know, the owner, with the licensee's logos attached to a corner facing the street or facing the parking, whatever you want. But limit it in size so that it doesn't become wrapping paper for the entire darn cabana. And I would keep it so small that it would be almost similar in size to the signage that we allow private businesses to occur in homes. In other words, why are we talking about wraps? I think that's the really wrong direction to go. And anything that really obliterates an entire side of a cabana, I think it violates the whole idea of the joy of seeing people enjoying themselves on the outside on the city street.
How would the committee like to proceed? We do have one member of the public. You haven't indicated whether you wish to speak or not. You do wish to speak? Okay, thank you. Matt Cho.
Hello again. Yeah, obviously I'm in favor of the curbana. I think, I guess to talk about some of the points that were brought up, I understand that aesthetically, Dennis, that you might have an issue with not being able to see the people, but I think for the purposes of the people that are sitting inside the curbana, I think that's the intent, is to provide them with some barrier. If there was no need for that, then why even have the fencing or anything at all if the intent was to basically see people sitting outside? Secondly, I did look at the table in the back, and I did do a cursory look on Googling each one of those cities, and I was able to find that there was some sort of application of what I'm requesting in terms of a vinyl sign. So it's not that every community does not allow advertising per se, but there is this, I guess, proposed wrap that I try to provide some direction of how to articulate that legally. But to deem it as advertising, I think, is somewhat misleading. It is simply either a canvas that hides through, that covers each, I guess, square of the Urbana. Whether or not it has a Sipyard or Crane Alley's logo on it, I guess I'm indifferent to that. If it did, then great, but if it had City of Urbana on it, then I would be also content, or some sort of artwork, I'd be content with that. But I think for the purposes of the people that are sitting inside there, to have that level of privacy, whether a vinyl screen or plantings, that would be the request. But per the owner, I would be willing to invest in the actual signage or the vinyl, but I know that offers some legal restrictions and free speech elements, so didn't know it was going to be this complicated. But
Questions for Matt? Mike?
Well, it's Urbana. It's always complicated. But what I would just say about this, too, is in terms of a visual barrier, I think Matt makes a really good point. And also, this is not any kind of, this would not be any kind of covering that is much higher than table level. So, you know, you're not impeding on anyone's vision one way or the other, because it's literally like a table height type of wrap. And I do know that in our sign ordinances, like for my business, I'm only allowed to have signage on a percentage of my storefront. So that's not content, that's a percentage of the face. So I would think that while you wouldn't be able to say what the sign said, I'm sure that downtown Urbana businesses would want them to be tasteful as well,
right,
and would want them to portray the image of downtown Urbana. So I think we're overthinking this just a little bit, and that a lot of I mean, you just Google sidewalk cafe images, and there are tons of very good looking ones that would probably actually enhance the aesthetic.
I guess I would point out that the difference here is sidewalk cafes versus this public Urbana. I think that's where the difference is, because the fact it's disconnected sort of from the building.
So what is the huge difference there?
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yeah, I don't see that. I mean, I really don't see that. It's, you talk about in Europe about how they are, frankly, actually disconnected and in a boulevard. I don't see this. People are implying that there's some kind of great difference between a Urbana and a sidewalk cafe, and for the sake of this discussion, I don't see it. They are both equally as close to traffic. You go to Chicago and you see a sidewalk cafe, heck, downtown Champaign. It's right up on the curb. Well, this is right up on the lane of traffic as well. It's just extended in, into the parking area. So I just don't see, it's a distinction without a difference to my mind with regard to the signage.
Dan, then Eric.
Well, there's no difference in the appearance or the function, but the only difference is the Urbana is basically a public park in the way it, in that it's open to anybody who wants to sit there, not just the people patronizing that business. And then and as where a sidewalk cafe is associated with a particular business, so I was all for this, but when I got to thinking of would a business logo on the Urbana discourage people from using the Urbana if they hadn't purchased something at the Sipyard or at Pizza M or wherever the Urbana is? Because it's a public space.
Oh.
I mean, while I don't enforce it, I mean, I know that it is being enforced on the other Urbana, so I mean, honestly, I would just be fine with some sort of screening.
Yeah.
If it had my logo or not, I think I'm
Okay.
indifferent.
Eric?
And I think screening is a good idea, actually.
Okay. Eric?
So Matt, where you're coming from is the other side of the sign. Essentially, you're making the case that patrons in a cabana would like to feel more visually enclosed.
Right.
And which wasn't the perspective that I thought of initially. Well, especially because it was presented to us as advertising.
Right, and I think that is probably the wrong word to use for this. Yeah, like you said, if you Google sidewalk cafe or sidewalk seating, it was essentially trying to find out what would the product be in order to attach to a cabana, and most of the instances are a vinyl canvas of some sort with the logo of the establishment on it. And so doing that kind of cursory search is kind of where I started, and that's where the ask came is, am I allowed to do a vinyl banner to provide a privacy screen for the patrons of Sip Yard?
Question for Jim real quickly. Could we allow such a screening with no content?
Yes.
Just simply, yes.
Just, either a blank screen or just some artwork screen, yes.
Okay, and could we allow, going a step further, could we put our own logo and the logo of the business in some fashion? You're saying we could do that, and
they're a sponsor. I mean, yes, we could allow that.
Okay, but would we have to pay for it, or could we allow them to pay for it?
Either way.
Either way, okay.
But you are still getting into advertising.
Okay. So, but if we pay for it, then we can put whatever logo or identification.
If we own
want
the
to.
sign, we own the sign.
Okay.
And it's when we try to regulate other people's speech is when we get into a problem.
Okay. Bill first.
Okay, so how about if we required any sign on I don't even know if we need 3 sides, even just the side facing the street seems like it'd be enough. But what if we allowed businesses to donate a sign to the city, and then it would become ours, and we would choose whether or not to put it up?
I'm not sure I understand your hypothetical.
Well, you said we had to own it in order to control content. So if it was donated to the city and we owned it, then we could decide whether or not to put it up.
Now you're beginning to split hairs. And unfortunately, I don't believe Reed versus Town of Gilbert addresses that, so I don't have an answer on that one.
Okay.
In the interest of time, I'm going to suggest that we keep this in committee. Let staff think about it some more now that they've heard some of these and interact, and maybe we can come up with some creative. Dennis, then Eric.
Right. If there was going to be logoizing for the sake of a business, which I think Matt was really wanting to do because he's a business promoter and he has a business on Main Street, and so it's kind of interesting to hear him all of a sudden, saying that it could be, picture of the city or something like. But okay, I still, I could see, having a small 16 by 20 inch plaque, okay, saying that the leasee is and have his logo. I mean, I could see that. I just don't see totally encasing the Urbana, and I've said that. I mean, we already have it encased by a railing, and the original intent of the Urbanas was beautification. We were talking about, including planters and things like that. That was a completely different direction than wrapping it in plastic. I mean, now, a thing I might consider is that if you have an outdoor table with an umbrella, I could see you could put your logo on your umbrella because you're providing that seating and it's part of your restaurant. You own that, and I could see that being placed on the cabana, but I don't see putting giant signs because anything you do, it's going to be like billboardizing a cabana. Cabanas were supposedly created to have their own aesthetic, if people feel endangered by being them, I haven't heard anybody say that they did feel endangered by them, then wrapping them, well, I'm not into it, but that's the will of the city council.
It would be helpful as we look at this again if we could have some images of how the Urbanas would look with signs of various kinds. I'm trying to, image that in my mind, but the real images would be helpful.
Okay. Like, I don't think, even if you made a decision tonight, I think, we're talking about 2017, so.
So we have time to do this right.
Can I
Dennis.
say, and if we did allow it, the fee for rental should be at least $700.
Well, okay, so
That's billboard advertising. We might as well get some money for that.
Well, okay, so
Agreed.
A motion here.
Shipyard?
A motion would be in order to keep this in committee if that's our desire. Otherwise, it goes away.
I move to keep this issue in committee.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to keep this in committee. We'll flesh it out some more. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Motion carries. Next up, I think we have 3 items related to TIF district. Ordinance number 2016-989, an ordinance revising the annual budget ordinance for fiscal year 2016-17, existing TIF district revisions in central TIF. And should I go to read all 3? You're going to talk about all 3 at once?
You'll do one at a time.
One at a time. Okay, let's do that one first.
Hello again. Council is tonight considering 3 ordinances. The first is a budget amendment. The second is an ordinance that would effectively dissolve tax increment finance district number 1. And the third would effectively remove properties from TIF 2. These actions are all in preparation for the approval of the central TIF, which is currently scheduled for October 17th. On the September 19th council meeting, 3 ordinances were introduced, moved, and then postponed to the October 17th meeting, and those ordinances would provide for the adoption of TIF 3. These actions tonight are, again, in preparation for those forthcoming actions. The discontinuation of TIF 1 and the amendment of the TIF 2 boundary are intended to make certain properties available for inclusion in the central TIF, best explained, I think, by the map. And again, the boundary has not substantially changed since the original resolution was passed back in February. These actions would also make available approximately $7.8 million in EAV to the general tax base for taxes levied in 2016 and payable in 2017. So these are specifically the actions that are going to free up the existing EAV that is currently is included as part of the TIF increment. This enhanced tax base, using the current tax rates, would yield about $827,000 of tax revenue to all taxing partners, or about $105,000 to just the city. The TIF budget amendment collectively will not increase budget expenditures, and it introduces no new expenses or categories of expense. 4 funds are involved in this budget transfer. The first is the existing TIF one, which is effectively being zeroed out so that it can be closed. The second is the post-TIF closure fund. This is a reused fund that was used for the post-TIF 3 fund, and it is rather common to have expenditures fall into a post-TIF category like this. It will specifically hold certain funds for obligated TIF 1 expenditures as outlined in the memo. TIF 2 will be amended to reflect changes in revenue because the EAV that the TIF can collect increment upon will be reduced by the removal of properties, and many expenditures moved to the central TIF from TIF 2 are being moved, as with the 129 North Race agreement that was discussed earlier this evening, because those properties are now will now be in the central TIF. Lastly, we'll create the central TIF fund. This new fund would be for the purposes of managing the central TIF's revenues and expenditures, and it would also largely reassign expenses from TIF 1 and TIF 2 in a corresponding amount of revenue from TIF 2 for the startup of the central TIF fund. Approval of these ordinances, again, are all in preparation legally and financially for the adoption of the central TIF on October 17th. And I'll take any questions you might have.
Questions? Is there a motion on the first item?
Yeah, I'll move ordinance number 2016-09-089, an ordinance revising the annual budget ordinance for fiscal year 2016-17 concerning existing TIF district revisions and central TIF district to the committee with approval.
To council with approval.
To council, that's right, sorry.
It's getting late.
Second.
It's been moved by Dennis, seconded by Eric. Any discussion?
Yeah, one.
Yes.
We always call it the Central TIF district. I wonder if we might abbreviate it to CENTIF. That's just a thought.
Branding is afterwards, I think.
Thank you.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, next up is part 2 of this is ordinance number 2016-990, an ordinance dissolving the special tax allocation fund and terminating the designation of downtown Urbana tax increment redevelopment project area within the city of Urbana, Champaign County, Illinois. Do you want to add anything on this, Brandon?
Okay, I
Diane?
move approval.
Diane had a hand up.
I was just going to move it.
Okay.
And I'll second it.
Moved by Diane, seconded by Dennis. Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. It goes to council. Item 3 of this is ordinance, item 14 is part 3 is ordinance number 2016-991, an ordinance of the city of Urbana, Champaign County, Illinois, removing certain properties from the downtown Urbana tax increment redevelopment project area number 2. Anything to add, Brandon? Is there a motion? Dennis?
Yeah. I move that we approve this, send this to council with approval.
I'll second.
It's been moved by Dennis, seconded by Bill Brown. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Let's see. Oh, there's a 4th item here. A resolution deeming certain funds in the Special Tax Allocation Fund for the Downtown Urbana Tax Increment Redevelopment Project Area as surplus funds and directing the payment and distribution thereof. Elizabeth Hannon.
So this is the last time you will do this. This has been an annual exercise since 2004 to distribute a portion of TIF 1 funds to all of the taxing districts. The amount this year increases by less than 1% because the amount of property tax extended for the TIF also increased by less than 1%.
Questions for Elizabeth? Is there a motion?
I'll move approval.
Okay, move to send this to council, you mean?
Or I'll move to send this to council with a recommendation that they, such as we, approve it.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Moved by Eric, seconded by Bill Brown. Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That goes to council. Item 16 is Resolution 2016-963R, a resolution approving and authorizing the execution of an agreement between Online Solutions LLC, known as CitizenServe, and the City of Urbana for automated services related to building safety. Community development?
Over here.
Oh, sorry. It's late. Sorry, John. You're just faded into the background there.
These 2 agenda items for council consideration. The first one is services agreement with Online Solutions LLC or CitizenServe for automated services for building safety activities, and the second is a proposed budget amendment that would reallocate funds from related line items to pay for the initial year for the cost of services. For tracking information, rental registration, for tracking property information, rental registration, the various types of inspections that we perform, Building Safety has been using the AS400 mainframe and PT-Win, which is outdated software that's no longer supported. Since mid-2015, Building Safety staff work with information technology staff to formulate proposals, requests for implementation of software that will, in essence, upgrade building safety capabilities to more efficiently deliver services to Urbana residents related to property maintenance, rental registration, and building code enforcement. As part of this process, IT staff also worked with finance and public works departments to identify their software needs. On the 1st of February this year, IT Division issued a combined request for proposals that would address multiple software needs with a submittal deadline of April 8, 2016. Included in the RFP criteria for the building safety-related software was for a system that would allow inspectors to use mobile devices to electronically record inspection results on site, including photos and videos, and incorporate applicable code language, to use the inspection results to generate violation letters to property owners that include applicable code references and compliance timelines to help track compliance and issue clear notices once violations are corrected, and to allow building inspectors to document results of construction inspections on site. The RFP also asked proposers to provide information regarding whether their product could be used for construction-related activities such as online permitting and online rental registration processing. 3 proposals were received in response to the requirements for the Building Safety Division needs. 2 of those companies were invited to demonstrate their software and answer staff questions. IT and Community Development staff agreed that the proposal that best matched the needs of the Community Development Department was submitted by CitizenServe, or Online Solutions. Acquisition and implementation of this software will allow for improved customer service by providing a more streamlined process for rental inspections and reports, plan reviews, and building permit issuance, and adds convenience for rental registration, inspection, scheduling, and online payments. We have also budgeted for licenses for fire and public works departments in order to improve coordination and allow for information sharing among the departments. During the plan review process and for improved record keeping, this will help us too, because we can do online submittals, PDF documents. This has been requested for a long time. People can pay for a variety of services online through the portal. Improved coordination among departments has long been a goal of the city, and new software will allow for improved information sharing and coordination. The budget amendment, the second part, would reallocate funds from related line items in the CD budget that would pay for the first year's services and equipment. CD worked with information technology staff and legal division to develop the agreement for services, and worked with finance staff to develop the budget amendment that would to reallocate the funds from existing related line items to pay the first year cost of services.
Questions for John? Bill?
No, this seems like a real reasonable proposal. My only question is, during the demonstration or your questioning of the vendor, did you find out if we want to change vendors 2 or 3 years from now, is there a portable format for exporting historical data? Or is this something where we get locked into their format and then we'd have to pay somebody $20,000 to export the data into a new format for a new company?
My understanding of the system is that right now we're working to prepare our data to be exported into this system, and they actually have I think they have a programmability to use. They've done PT Win information before into their system, and then they would provide it to us in the future in Excel format or whatever format, and it's also going to be incorporated.
Exported in Excel, basically?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Great, thanks.
John, I wanted to understand a little bit more. The funds are coming from a position that's not being used anymore, not being filled, or what's the rearrangement there?
I think Libby can speak to that part of it. I was on vacation when the budget amendment was put together, so I apologize for that.
Yeah, we actually started talking about automating the software, I think 2 budgets ago. I looked back in the presentations, and early on we had also expanded our staff to include a code enforcement coordinator to deal with some of the challenges we had. That's been a position that we have not been able to fill for several months now, and we've been, by acquiring the software, it may be that we don't need the 3rd position, but that's really a more appropriate discussion to have at budget time.
Okay, so the position really hasn't gone away. It's you just don't know.
No,
yet.
it's sort of, it's being held as vacant. It may be that this automation removes the need for that coordinated position, but it wasn't something that we were really easily able to find people out there in the workforce who were able to fill that role. And we think with these tools working together, we can achieve a lot with our housing inspectors.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Other questions? Is there a motion? The first item is resolution. Yeah, I already read that. Yeah.
I move approval of resolution number 2016-09-063R. Or I recommend. God, I can't even.
Yeah.
I move that we send this resolution to council with a recommendation for approval.
I'll second that.
It's been moved by Diane, seconded by Eric. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And then the companion piece is ordinance number 2016-992, an ordinance revising the annual budget ordinance for fiscal year 2016-17 for automated systems for building safety. Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion that we adopt, that we send this to council with approval.
I'll second.
It's been moved by Dennis and seconded by Bill Brown to send this to council. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Seeing no further business, we're adjourned.